and pop up on your end to give me permission to record. And before we get started, I just got a couple housekeeping items, housekeeping things to go through just to kind of follow up from what we talked about last time. So I hit hard the idea of being in a distraction free area to take class, a distraction free area to study. How many of you were able to secure an area in your home that you can be left alone for this time together? Perfect. You got your door closed. You got a note on the door that says, I'm in class, leave me alone. I'll see you on break, that kind of thing, whatever. So again, just hitting the importance of being distraction free. You know, if I were to hit on mute right now, everybody, would I hear anything in the background? Would I hear a TV? Would I hear a radio? Would I hear kids and family yelling? You guys with me? That's what we mean by being in a distraction. I'm not going to because I know the answer to that. But that's what I mean by being in a distraction free area. Hang on, I'm having technical difficulties. Well, somebody is. I'm not. So again, I just can't stress the importance. And guys, there's two groups of you. So I have something to say to each group. Some of you are a retake, you've taken this class before. The rest of you are the first time you're taking pre-licensing. If you're a retake, if you have taken this class before, please don't fall into what I call the retake trap. The retake trap is when you convince yourself that you don't have to study because you already know this stuff. Please don't fall into that trap. If you're a retake, treat this as if it were the first time you were taking it. Treat this as the first time. If you're not a retake and this is your first time, I think sometimes, how many of you got through high school, got through college by studying the night before? You waited until the night before, you crammed, you stayed up all night, and then you flew through and got your diploma. It doesn't work that way here. So again, the other thing that we hit hard on is doing the assignments as we go along, doing the material, keeping up with the material, reading ahead before a class. Let's discuss it in class. And then you go spend time in Learn Test Pass, doing the quizzes, the supplemental, that kind of thing. Please, please, please don't think you're going to wait until the middle of February and then sit down and start studying. It doesn't work that way. So retakes hear me, first timers hear me, all of you hear me. Whether it's your first time through pre-licensing or not, I guarantee you it's not mine. So trust the system, you guys. Trust the system. We've been here, done that. And always remember, I am here to help you. A couple questions we had last class that I got some clarification on. We talked about basic calculators. Did anybody go calculator shopping this weekend? We're going to start some math this week. Your exam has a built-in calculator on the computer. And I talked to the people that will be proctoring your exam. They don't care if you use your basic calculator that you purchased or if you use their built-in calculator. So you don't have to buy one. They have one available for you. With that being said, I still suggest you guys getting your own, a basic calculator, because this just works different than the calculator on your phone and even the calculator maybe on your computer. So if I can get you guys practicing on this, then you'll be familiar with the idea of a basic calculator come test day. So again, consider calculator. We're actually going to start some math this week. The other question we got is if you guys can see in Learn Test Pass previous attempts. So we said you could take the same quiz over and over and over again. And the question was, can I see my results from previous attempts? And I've learned from the people that Learn Test Pass that you can. So if you take a quiz multiple times, then you can go through and see hopefully how you've improved, how you've been doing a little bit better. You know what I'm saying? So you can see how that can grow. So you can see that history. Will they flag you if they don't see the physical calculator? No. Learn Test Pass says whatever y'all want to do. Do y'all want to bring a physical calculator, or do you want to use the one that's available on their website, on their program? Now, when you go to Pearson VUE, when you go to your state exam, Some students have told me that Pearson VUE allows you to use your own calculator. Others have said that they require you to use the one on the computer. I guess it's dependent on location. I don't really have the answer to that. But again, if you're practicing on a basic calculator, then you're preparing yourself for both exams, whether it's the one that you touch or the one that you have on your computer. When you go to Pearson VUE, I say take it. If they don't let you use it, worst case scenario, you lock it up with the rest of your personal effects and you have the one on the computer. Talking about your previous attempts, I think that's good that you guys can see what what did I make the first time I took the test? What did I make the second? What did I make the third time? And that way, again, you can just kind of see your progress, see how you're doing as you go on. Hopefully, you guys are all now in Learn, Test, Pass. If you are not, please do so. Remember what I just said. Don't wait till the week before or the day before the exam and try to get in. If you're not Learn, Test, Pass, please do so. If you're having problems whatsoever, reach out to Jane. She can help you get in. I also sent all of you an email on Friday with our YouTube channel and our Google Drive links. I see head bobs. If you didn't get the email from me for whatever reason, just reach out to me and I'll be happy to forward it. But I did send it. Our first class has been loaded in our YouTube channel. I'm recording right now. So as we get through tonight, I'll have that loaded in tomorrow morning. It's usually the next morning before I can have it available to you guys. So we'll have it in tomorrow morning for you to go back and review. And then same thing with the Google Drive. The big thing about the Google Drive is going to be our class PowerPoints. So if you want access to those, some of you like to pull them up and go through them with me in class. Some of you want to use them for review. Whatever works for you, they're available. I agree. I agree, Stephanie. I'm so excited. So excited. Yeah. Who do I hear? See, that's Zai. Hey, Zai. Was that
Is my
did you have
mic unmuted?
accidental on mute?
I'm sorry.
Accidental on mute. It happens. Welcome. Okay, a couple other things. Making sure I covered all here. So you're reaching out to Jane for any access to Learn, Test, Pass. You're reaching out to me, YouTube channel, Google Drive if you didn't get that. Getting ready to start unit 2. Okay, something else, again, over my years, something else I have learned that you guys like to do, and I think it's a bad habit, and some of you might already be doing it, or some of you might start. So I want to address it and squash it today. And the bad habit is allowing yourself to play the what if game. So you read a test question, you say, well, what if this? Or what about that? And as soon as you allow yourself to question the alternatives, then you are derailing yourself from the question. So please hear me, you guys. You don't need to read anything into the question. All the information that you need to answer this question is already in there. So I don't need you guys to start, well, what about, because there was this one time that I bought a house and this happened, or somebody I know. Please don't start that what if or what about game. I call it, you're like running down the rabbit trail, So stick to the question, don't add to it. What you need is there. If you started that habit, this is a great time to break it. If you haven't, you may want to write down in your notebook right now, what if, what about, doesn't belong. Because remember, there's real world and then there's pre-licensing world. And while I know many of you have real world experience, that's not going to get you through the test. Being able to read these test questions, interpret these test questions is what's going to get you through. So please don't read into it. And think about this too. Wouldn't my what if be different than your what if? We wouldn't have the same what if scenarios, would we? So again, please stick to the test, to the question and the answer choices. And I think The only other thing I have here, somebody asked as we were leaving last class about study groups. And I know study groups are a little bit harder on Zoom. If we were in person, you guys would be talking to each other before and after class. You would be, um, talking to each other on break, and you'd be forming your own study groups. Online, we don't have that. We don't have that ability. So if anybody's interested in possibly forming a study group, what I'll do when we're done tonight at 9:30, I'll stop recording and I'll leave the call open so you guys can connect and exchange phone numbers, emails, whatever it is you want to do. You may not be able to meet in person because not all of you are going to be in this area. Some of you, how many of you in Winston-Salem? I'm just curious. How many of you in Winston-Salem? Some of you, but the rest of us are other places in the state, maybe even somewhere else in the country. So for an online class, you may want to consider a study group online, maybe a private Facebook group or a WhatsApp, something like that. But I'll leave the call open please help me remember. But I'll leave the call open tonight at 9:30 so you guys can exchange contact information and figure out what's best for you to meet if you're interested. Study groups are completely optional. Questions on anything so far? Let's see. There's Alexandra. Hey, could you rename yourself, throw in your last name for me, please? And then we'll have you. And that and that. Video. Let's see. Let me ask you to, I think I can. So, Nizelle, we may just need you to, I don't know if you have another device you can come on, maybe your phone, so we can see you in your video, and then connect with Jane to help you troubleshoot. It's weird because it was up last class. So, but yeah, I'm happy to work with you in this class, whatever we can to make it happen, and then try another computer. Awesome. Perfect. Technology is great when it works, guys, right? Any questions or comments? I think that blew through my through my
Hey, who did you say you couldn't see?
I'm sorry, Nizelle. We're cool. Yep.
Oh, I thought you said my name.
Nope. What is February 8th at 10:30? Is that your cram course? So you got the tentative schedule. I'm guessing without looking at the tentative schedule. You got your tentative schedule. Let's go look at that one more time, you guys. This is the last time I can look at the tentative schedule together. So remember, you got everything in your Google Drive. And in so we have a tentative schedule. And this is in the email I sent you guys on Friday. And the 8th is your cram course. So all the dates you need are right here on this nice little handy dandy piece of paper. And I highly recommend that you take a few minutes and put these dates in your calendars so you're ready, so you're prepared. Anything else on our housekeeping stuff? The dates for the practice exams, I don't have that yet, but our first part exam is after Unit 5. We're just starting Unit 2 tonight, so we are ways away. Trust me, I will tell you when we're getting closer to those required exams. I might be a little obnoxious about it. You'll know. You'll know when it's time. Do you have to take the cram course? Absolutely not. Remember, all you have to do to get your certificate of completion is not miss more than 15 hours, take the three parts exams, and pass the end of class exam. Everything else I offer is a suggestion to help you achieve that goal of getting your certificate of completion. So the cram course is completely optional, but it's included. We're not charging you extra for it, and it's going to help you get ready for that end of class exam. Yes, ma'am. Ebony, hello.
Hi. I would like to know, and probably the class too. Will most of the like the quizzes, will most of those questions be on the mandatory exams as well? Or like
Not
mixed
virtual
in or
not word for word, but the topics.
Topics, okay,
Yes.
just
So
similar.
when we do that first part, it'll be what we've covered up until Unit 5. And then, tell me again, is it Najanda? I'm sorry.
Oh, the name is Gonda, or you
Gonda,
call me
thank you.
Zele, or Gonda. So I change computers, it just depends on which name I have on that computer.
Okay,
But my first name is Gonda, or you can call me by my middle name, Zele.
okay. And is Gonda how I have you on my roster?
I think you have, I don't know how you have me there. I'm not sure.
We need to make sure. So we'll need to look at that. I'll reach out to you after class because I need to make sure what
That's
I have
fine.
on the roster matches. So I make sure I
For
give you.
all purposes, I use my name as it is on all my legal documents, which is Gonda first.
Okay. So
So
we'll
that's
just make
what I
sure.
think you should have.
Okay, perfect. So we'll just make sure that that matches. All right. Well, y'all want to play a game? Yeah, let's play a game. Y'all get your phones. Your phones are on silent, hopefully, so they're not distracting you. But I also said don't let them go too far away because sometimes we play games. Anybody ever Kahoot before? I know some of you have because, but the rest of you may or may not have. So we're going to do a quick review on Unit 1, what we covered in Unit 1. We're going to do a Kahoot. And as it's loading, I'm coming up with a QR code for you guys. The QR code will be your access into Kahoot. So there it is. You can scan the QR code. That's the fastest way to get into a Kahoot. You can see there, you can also download the app or get on the website. If you're going to download the app, you may not have time to play on your phone tonight because it does take a while to download. But if you go ahead and download the app, then we can get you on next time. But again, QR code, quickest, easiest way. I'm happy if you want to use nicknames for Kahoot. I don't require Kahoot. And if you don't want to play on your phone, that's okay. Just at least play in your mind. Because this kind of gives us an idea of where we are. Quick review on Unit 1. If you've never Kahooted before, once you put in your name, and you can see your name, your little avatar popping up here. Right now, your phone's not doing anything. So once we start the Kahoot, you're going to see a question on my screen. And then you're going to have 4 answer choices, and your phone will change to the 4 answer choices. So you just select the answer choice that you want to answer. At the end, we see the overall class results. Nobody sees specifically what you answer, only you'll know if you got it right or wrong. But isn't that the important thing? So you know if you got it right or wrong. Kahoot also does a podium. So we have first place, second place, and third place. Some of us have a competitive.
Do you see me up there? Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
What's it say on your phone?
Mandy, it just says you're in. See your nickname on the screen.
Okay, so yep, you're in.
Okay, got it.
There it is. Yep. A Kahoot, not often, but periodically, good little check-in, getting a good little review. I get asked a lot if my Kahoots are available for you guys to look at after class. The direct answer to that is no, but don't forget I'm recording. So you can always go back through and watch the Kahoot again on the recording. But no, the only way I can give you access to the Kahoot is give you my login and password, and that's not going to happen. So you have the recording, you can go through and kind of come back through on your own time. And again, some of us, I don't know, some people will tell you that real estate agents just tend to have a competitive nature to us. So Kahoot might feed into that competitive nature. But again, what's important to me, I'd rather you guys get the information than place on the podium. Everybody with me? It's a matter about getting it right or wrong, or at least understanding why it's right.
Is this just Unit 1?
What's that, Zai?
Is this just Unit 1?
Just Unit 1. That's all we've covered so far. Is everybody in that wants to play? this time. Some of you may just want to sit back and see what's getting ready to happen, and that's cool too. If your phone goes to sleep, then you may want to wake it up. All right, so phone's still not doing anything. Phone's still not doing anything. So we have our Unit 1 Kahoot. And you're getting ready to see a question on my screen. This says, the main purpose of the North Carolina Real Estate Commission is. Now look at your phones. You should be able to select red, blue, gold, or green. Your time. Got about 10 more seconds. Uh-oh. And then we see, look at you guys, and then we see the main purpose of the Real Estate Commission is to protect the public. Protect the public from who? From brokers, from licensees, making sure that the licensees are protecting the public's best interest when they're engaging in brokerage transactions. Thank you, everybody, for not saying the green one, because they do have a purpose. Another thing that the commission does is we learned they issue our license, they regulate our license, they discipline our license. But guys, that's not their main purpose. Them giving me a license is whether or not I prove that I can protect their public. Once I'm licensed, if I harm their public, now we got an issue. That is and always will be their main purpose. So our podium, I got Shannon came in first. She got it. This means she got it right the fastest. That's how Kahoot's graded. Who gets it right the fastest? Followed by Ari and Stephanie, Big Zai, and 2634708. And then we can just kind of reiterate, this is a screenshot right from the Real Estate Commission's homepage, ncrec.gov. And in case you can't see what it says there in white, it actually says to protect the public interest in real estate brokerage transactions, that being their number one purpose. Questions? A North Carolina real estate broker must renew their license no later than five seconds. What's that renewal date? June 30th. Good job, you guys. Y'all know if we were in person with a Kahoot result like this, I would buy you guys candy for the next class. But since we're not in person, why don't y'all go buy yourselves some candy tomorrow? How about that? Go get you a candy bar tomorrow. Good job, guys. Our renewal period, the commission's physical year is July 1st to June 30th. Every single license in this state expires at 11:59 p.m. on June 30th, unless it's renewed. So we renew each year. Let's see. Ari came up. She's on top now. Shannon, Stephanie, Big Zai, and 2634708 still on the board. Kevon's our highest climber. You might have a little summit on your phone showing that you're up 10 places this round. And then this is just a reminder. You may want to take a screenshot. This is a quick reminder of some of those important dates that we talked about on the first class. So the physical year is July 1st to June 30th. Our renewal period is May 15th to June 30th. What do y'all think of when I say renewal? What's that mean to you? Renewal means, y'all showing me, money, money, money. Renewal means you have paid the fee. We have to do CE deadline each year, starting your second year on June 10th. And then post-licensing is within 18 months of licensure. Questions on this? Next one, you are licensed on May 29th. Which of the following is true? Ten seconds. job, you guys. Remember, we're going to see in just a second, your application fee and your renewal fee are two different things. So you're licensed on May 29th, you pay the application fee. All licenses expire by 11:59 p.m. on June 30th. Y'all hear that absolute word? All licenses expire unless they are renewed. So you're licensed on the 28th, you got to renew by the 30th. Oh, shuffled up a bit. Stephanie leaped to the top. Tyler's on the board now. Damaris is on the board. Ari's still on. Ty jumped up. Marlo's our highest climber, up 14 places. And remember, you guys, they're two different things. The application fee is what you pay to be able to take your state exam. Remember, we're going to talk about the application process. We're going to talk more about you going to your state exam, but it is way too early for us to talk about that now. So I promise you, when we're about halfway through-ish, we're going to spend some time talking about that. And your renewal fee and your application fee are not the same thing. Renewal fee renews your license and makes you current effective July 1st. Questions on this one? Which of the following is true about firm licensing? Seconds. All licenses expire. All licenses has to be renewed. The individual broker's license, the firm license, it all has to be renewed by June 30th. You can be a sole proprietor as long as you're not advertising or marketing. If you're advertising or marketing, then you have to have a license. You have to have a firm license. LLCs, partnerships, corporations, all those do require a firm license. So the entity is licensed, the individual is licensed. So let's see. Firms and brokers, yeah, firms and brokers all have to follow the same rules. License law and commission rules applies to all, the entity and the individual. So now the fun piece of Kahoot. They're going to give us this dramatic podium placement. So who's our podium winners? My unit 1, third place is Stephanie. Second place is Ty, jumped up a little bit. My first place Kahooter is Tyler. I got a Ty and a Tyler. Interesting. I got 4th and 5th runners up of Ari and Demarius. But guys, overall, what a great Kahoot. Tells me you guys spent some time with Unit 1, looked at Unit 1. Oh my, this is new. Look, there all of you are. This is new. Now, how do I get out of it? Oh, okay. They updated over the winter break too. Any questions or comments before we move on from Unit 1? I mentioned last week, this is an intense class. I mentioned that we cover a lot of information. I hope you guys heard me. Guys, this class doesn't have a rear view mirror. When I say we're done with Unit 1, we're putting it behind us and we're moving forward. Listen to me. If you have a question, if you have something on Unit 1 that you don't understand, that's when you reach out to me. That's when you shoot me a text, shoot me an email. Is everybody with me? That's why you have me outside of class. When we're together, we have got to point forward. We have to. If you guys want to get through all the material. You guys want to get through all the material? So we've got to point forward. I am your rear view mirror outside of class. Is everybody good with that? Yes? Hi, Corey.
Hi, Julie. Just had a quick question with regards to the flashcards on Learn Test Pass, or
Mhm.
well, however it's said. I'm just having problems like kind of navigating through that. It's like when I click on it, I'm like, what am I supposed to do?
So Corey, I'd be happy if you want to do maybe a quick Google Meets or something tomorrow. I'd be happy to kind of go through and walk through what I know,
Okay.
and kind of show you how you can flip through that.
Okay.
Just reach out to me after class and we'll schedule, 5 minutes or something just to kind of go through and show you what we can flip through. But I think a lot of it, because I know I mean, it's new to all of us, but I think a lot of it is just kind of clicking and seeing what it does, but I love the flashcards that they've done. And you guys can kind of take that. I got a couple of you bobbing your head, so I know you've seen the flashcards, but they're almost designed as like, think of them as almost additional test questions
Hmm.
without the multiple choice. So it kind of gives you something, and then you have to flip the card, to see the answer. So reach out to me, Corey, and I'll be more than happy to help to look at that with you.
Will do. Thank you.
Thank you. So with all of that being said, how many of you have read Unit 2? Be honest with me. How many of you read Unit 2? Oh, I love all these hands. Thank you. I know somebody logged in at the beginning and said there's some weird stuff going on at Unit 2. Could we all agree with that? If you've read Unit 2, hopefully we're going to spend our next couple classes together sorting through it, going through it. If you haven't read Unit 2, you might feel a little lost tonight. You might feel a little bit like, what is she talking about? And this is where I cannot stress the importance of reading ahead. I cannot emphasize the importance of reading ahead. So when we're talking about it at class, you've at least exposed yourself to it once. Now in class, we hear it again. Learn, test, pass, you hear it again. The YouTube channel, you hear it again. I'm a big fan of repetition. The more times you hear it, the more times you see it, the easier and better it's going to play. Um, Ariana, play with your it's like your Zoom. You can make it grid, make it side by side view. It should be an option at the top there, so you can kind of play around with how you see things in your Zoom. The big thing is I want you guys to see my screen. I'd rather you see my screen than me. Thank you. Yeah, that's all I have is flowers. Yep. Aren't they pretty? Flowers make me smile. You know what? I like to smile. So here they are. Hopefully they brought a smile to you as well. All right. I don't know about y'all, but I think we are just kind of ready to jump right in. Again, we're going to be here most of the week. I always tell us before we leave what we're going to cover next class. So we'll just get as far as we can tonight, see where we are, and then take it from there. So as you guys can see, Unit 2 really has several different things going on, but overall, we can categorize this all as real estate basics. So it's kind of teaching you guys, I don't know that you're ever going to have a buyer ask you about ownership interests, but if they do, don't you need to know how to respond? Don't you need to know how to tell them to do? So I don't think this unit is about being a real estate agent, but because we need to understand real estate basics. Remember on the first day, you guys, a big part of this job, a big part of this class is defining your lane. And what we're getting into in this unit is starting to define that lane. Remember that buyer that asked you about ownership interest? You know what the answer is? Talk to an attorney. Because I can't tell somebody how to take title. I can't, that's getting out of my lane. So I want you guys to hear me now. We are not attorneys. We're not in law school. We're not appraisers. We're not general contractors. We're not roofers. We're not electricians. We're not home inspectors. We're not pest. All we are is real estate agents. And a big part of our job is advising people when any of these things come up, advising people on where they need to go to get the information, how they can get the information. Write something down for me, please. Real estate agents, we are fact finders. I help provide the information for you to make an informed decision. I'm not the one buying this house. I'm not the one agreeing to take on a 30-year mortgage. What I'm doing is making sure you have all the information that you need so you are comfortable with buying, so you're comfortable taking on that 30-year mortgage. So when we talk about staying in your lane, a lot of what we're exposing you to in this unit is just real estate basics, and when we may need to advise people to go other sources, other places. Unit 2 is broken down into 3 topics. Now, I kept the topics on our PowerPoints that align with Learn, Test, Pass. So Learn, Test, Pass has like Unit 2, Topic 1. This is what we're going to cover first. And this kind of answers the question, when I buy a house, what comes with it? What do I get? Y'all think that's something buyers want to know? If I buy this house, what do I get? And this first section starts to address that. So we're going to define real property. We're going to talk about an owner's legal bundle of rights. We're going to define personal property, and we're going to compare real property to personal property. We're going to differentiate between real property and personal property. We're going to talk about manufactured or mobile homes, whether or not manufactured homes are part of real property or personal property. We're going to talk about things like fixtures, what goes, what stays, that kind of stuff. So, to start with the basics, let's just start defining real estate. And real estate is defined as land, everything permanently attached to the land. May that be attached by nature, or may that be attached by man. So we're talking about the lake, the trees, the stones, the ponds, but we're also talking about the house, the fence, the shed. This land and everything permanently attaches is the whole way up from the heavens down to the center of the earth. When you buy property, you just don't buy surface. We're going to talk about things like air rights and subsurface rights and what all those rights are that comes with this idea of ownership. In addition to the stuff, when you buy a property, homeowners also get what's referred to as their legal bundle of rights. Think of it as like taking twigs from the property, tying it up in a nice little bow and saying, these twigs from the property represent your legal bundle of rights. And we can remember our twigs by remembering the mnemonic deep sea. So the first twig is our D twig, and that D twig is our disposition twig. As the owner of property, part of your legal bundle of rights is you have the right to dispose of your property in any manner that you want to. Do you want to sell it? Do you want to gift it? That's up to you. As the owner, you have the right to dispose of the property in any manner that you wish. Our first E twig is the enjoyment twig. You have the right to use your land in any, this is the key word, any legal manner. We're going to get into things like zoning and covenants that may restrict how you use your land. But the enjoyment twig says you have the right to enjoy your property. You don't have to worry about harassment from somebody else as long as you're acting in a legal manner. You are the owner of record and you don't have to defend those rights. Our next E twig is the exclusion twig. The exclusion twig pretty much says no trespassing. As the owner of this property, I have the right to tell you not to come onto my property. I can exclude whomever. The opposite of that then would be our P twig, which is our possession. Not only do I have the right to say who can't come on the property, but I also have the right to say who can. So who has the right to occupy, who is allowed on the property. And then our C twig It's how is the control of the property. How I use it. Can I use it for my own profit? You know, do I want to, I don't know, plant an orchard and sell the harvest, profit from the harvest? Do I want to have a tenant live on my property? I think it's important that we see that while our legal bundle of rights are bundled, they can also be unbundled. So if I allow a tenant to live on my property, I got to give them some of my twigs. I'm giving up some of my power. And that's a choice I have, whether or not I want a tenant, whether or not I want to profit from the property. By the way, we got a whole unit for tenants. Property management is coming up in unit 13. So we're going to talk about that piece of it eventually. Just for a basic understanding of our physical characteristics of land, when we're talking about land, land is immobile. The geographic location is where it is. When I think of immobility, I always think you go to Google Maps and it puts the little red flag on it and says it is here. And guess what? That is where it is always going to be. That piece of land. Now, it may change over the years. It may build up. It may deteriorate down. But at the end of the day, that physical land is immobile. The land itself is indestructible. Structures come and go. You can tear down a building and build a new one. We're seeing this with Chick-fil-A everywhere, aren't we? That's what they're doing right now. They're tearing them down and they're building new ones. But the land itself remains. The land itself is indestructible. And then another thing to understand about land and any parcel of land is that they're all unique. You will never find two pieces of land exactly the same. They're all unique. They all look differently than the one before. Some economic characteristics of land. Land is scarce. What's that old saying? Buy land, they're not making any more of it, right? There's only so much land to go around. What do the big cities start doing when they run out of land? Now they start building up. Land is scarce. There's only so much to go around. This explains why, for example, waterfront property may be more valuable. There's only so many homes you can get around the lake or up and down the East Coast. Y'all know? I know y'all know. What are the three most important things about real estate? I can see your mouths move. You've heard this your whole life. Three most important things about real estate. Location, location, location. And when we're talking about economic characteristics of land, it's important that we talk about the location. When working with buyers, sellers, tenants, landlords, whatever, we're talking about location, this idea of situs. This is somebody's personal interest. Some of us may, I don't know, my retirement plan, I'm going east. I'm heading towards water. Some of you, when you retire, you may want to go west. You may go up in the mountains, right? That's our situs. That's our personal preference. So the location, you know, and there's so much to consider. You guys, if you bought a house, what's the proximity to my job? You know, where's my nearby grocery store, place of worship? You know, the things that we do on the regular basis, that location helps make those economic characteristics, helps make that land valuable and more valuable. Improvements to the land. So the house, the building, the shed, the fence, whatever it is that we're building to the land that man is putting on the land. And then our permanence of an investment. Real estate was never meant to be a short-term investment. Real estate takes time to grow. It takes time to build that equity. We're going to talk about equity as we get going in this class. But that permanence of an investment, if you're going to invest in a structure, if you're going to invest in installing plumbing and, you know, accessing electricity and sewer and water and all that stuff, you want this to be a long-term investment, a long-term thing. So just some, again, nothing really to get excited about just yet, but just kind of getting us warmed up, having a better understanding of some of these terms that we're going to see as we get going. Let's see. That's it. Thank you, Kiana. Kiana remembers this by looking at the mnemonic slip. SLIP. Thank you. Scarcity, location, improvements, and permanence of investment. So when it comes to people buying, as we said, buyers are going to ask you, they're going to point at stuff. When I buy this house, what do I get? Do I get this? Do I get that? What comes with it? So having an understanding of what stays and what goes. Personal property goes. I don't want you to write it. I mean, if you want to write it down, that's fine, but I need you to hear me. Anything, everything is negotiable. So for these conversations, could personal property stay? Sure. Could fixtures go? Absolutely. Because as long as it's legal, anything is negotiable. So when we're talking about personal property, first off, the understanding of personal property. Personal property is everything that's not permanently attached. I love the visual. Pick your house up, turn it upside down, and shake it. What falls loose goes. What doesn't stays. And the personal property are those things that are not personally attached. The personal property is the stuff that falls loose. Keeping in mind that anything and everything is negotiable. With that being said, probably, hands down, without a doubt, the number one personal property, negotiated personal property item in a real estate transaction is the refrigerator. The refrigerator is considered personal property. Think about it. It's just plugged in the wall. You unplug it, pick your house up, turn it upside down, let the refrigerator fall loose. It's not attached unless it's built in, of course. But typically the refrigerator is personal property, and this is going to be the number one personal property item. And in order for the seller to leave the refrigerator, it's got to be included in the contract. We get into our sales contract in about unit 8 or so. I do want you to write this down for me. And it's a question as we're getting into this, as we're reading and learning forms and contracts. It's a question I want you guys to refer to over and over and over again. And the question is, what does the contract say? Because if the contract says that the buyer is going to get the refrigerator, then the refrigerator, even though it's personal property, it will remain. So it's got to be included. What does the contract say? Very common question I ask myself on the regular. Movable items, not part of the real estate unless negotiated otherwise. And again, you guys, your test questions, if it doesn't tell you that the fridge is going to remain, then we need to treat the fridge as personal property. It's going to go unless otherwise agreed to, unless otherwise put in the contract. Sometimes lenders specifically may require personal property items not be in the contract, but instead be in an outside bill of sale. Every once in a while you have a buyer come in, and not only do they want the house, but they want the dining room suite, they want the bedroom furniture, they want the living room furniture. I mean, what a great compliment to the seller, right? That the buyer wants to buy everything that goes with it. All of those personal property items, it might be that the lender requires an outside bill of sale. We're going to put on our lender's hat. We're going to talk about financing when we get to unit 6. So we're going to have a better understanding of what the lender might do. We're getting there. couple other things that may be personal property, may not, depend. We have modular homes. Modular homes are built in sections off-site. They come in on big trucks and then they're assembled on-site. Typically, our homes are stick-built, which means they come in board by board on the back of a truck and they're all assembled on site. But we're starting to see this increase in modular homes. They might be a room at a time or a floor at a time. When they're still being built in the warehouse, when they're still being constructed or transported in, they've not been defined yet. But once they are brought to the location and placed on a permanent foundation, they are real property. They become real property. They become a fixture that is going to remain. And modular homes are built according to North Carolina building codes. We're going to talk about codes and permits and certificates of occupancy and all that good stuff is coming. But North Carolina building codes tell us specifically, or the builders, specifically standards on these modular homes. Now, this isn't the big slide, but I do like to compare this to our manufactured or mobile homes. Manufactured homes are built according to HUD standards. So NC building codes do modular homes, HUD does manufactured homes. And the question is, are manufactured homes personal property or real property? And the answer is, it depends. If a if a manufactured home is on wheels, if it has a title with DMV, if it has a hitch, it's considered personal property. Because don't all you have to do is hook that home up to a truck and drive away. That's about as personal property as it gets. So when does it become real property? Well, you got to remove that hitch. You got to remove those wheels. You have to put it on a permanent foundation. The land has to be owned by the owner of the modular home. And then you got to cancel that title with the DMV. So wheels, hitch, and the title would classify a manufactured home as personal property. Removing the wheels and hitch, canceling the title, is going to convert that into real property. Now it's attached to the land, and now it remains. So really the big difference between the two, because you can't always tell, you're not always standing there watching them when they build, but really the big difference between the two, once they've attached, this one's on our foundation, this is now real property. But the real difference between the two is who told them how to build it. Usually when you look in a manufactured home, if you look under the kitchen sink, the cabinet under the kitchen sink, you'll see the HUD sticker. With a modular home, you'll find that building code sticker. But typically what we deal with, what we see the most often, is site built, which means it comes in and it is constructed one board at a time, all according to our state building codes. And again, we'll talk a little bit more about those in just a bit. So I did see a hand. Hey, Ebony.
I just would like to know, does solar panels, is that considered personal property as well?
Those are probably going to be fixtures because of how they're attached.
Oh.
So we're going to get into, Ebony, that's a great segue. We're going to get into more on fixtures and how we can tell if it's fixture or personal property. And guys, let me tell you something. Sometimes I can't always look at it and tell you. So let me tell you guys right now, I don't know. Life gets so messy and I try to keep things simple. Anybody else with me? So one of my super simple philosophies, y'all ready? When in doubt, write it out. If you're not sure if it's a fixture or personal property and your buyer says, I'm not buying this house without these solar panels, then put it in the contract. And that way there's no question whatsoever. When in doubt, put it in the contract. Just remember, what does the contract say? And if it's not the contract, we may not be able to answer that, to address that. So it's break time, you guys. Let's take our first break. Remember, we get 10 minutes. So I got our clock. When we come back, we're going to talk about fixtures. We're going to talk about personal property. We're going to talk about how you and I may be able to look at some of these things and help our buyers and sellers identify whether or not it's a personal property or a fixture. So let's take 10. we're back. Welcome back. See, it's dinner time. I hear you. If you're eating dinner, I'm fine if you kind of want to like go off screen to eat because we don't need to see what you're eating this evening, you know. So yeah, that's the fun thing about Zoom. We're all just pretty much out there for everybody. But yeah, I know we're on dinner time, snack time, you know. All right, so cameras are back on and I can see you guys. Thank you. Remember, in order for me to count you present for this hour, so I'm going to do my screenshot for attendance. And so taking this introduction to real property and personal property, hitting on a few things. We're going to take this a little bit further in this section. And now we're going to talk about fixtures. We're going to talk about what a fixture is and how, if there's any concern or confusion about whether or not it stays or goes, how the legal system might determine if it's a fixture or personal property. It's called the total circumstance test. And then we're going to talk specifically about some things, talking about trade fixtures, agricultural fixtures, and something called the North Carolina Uniform Commercial Code, which addresses personal property that's leased and not yet owned. As we go into this section, most of your sales contracts are going to spell out what stays and what goes. We have a standard sales contract that we use on the regular that we will look at when we get to Unit 8. And it does spell out things that are considered fixtures unless excluded. Again, something I want you guys to keep in the back of your mind. Sometimes things aren't clear cut. Sometimes things aren't night and day, and there might be some confusion about whether or not this is personal property or a fixture. Parties, buyers and sellers to the contract have in the past argued over whether or not this is a fixture, whether or not this is a personal property. So just a good rule of thumb, like we said, when in doubt, write it out. So we're all on the same board, on the same page. But put real estate aside for a second. Just pretend real estate doesn't exist for a second. And whenever you have two people that can't agree to agree, then the judge can decide for them. So if you have buyers and sellers that are truly haggling over what's a fixture, what's personal property, it might be that the judge will have to decide for them. But usually, for the most part, the contracts will determine whether or not it stays or whether or not it goes. So talking about fixtures versus personal property. This person's concern is they took the doorknobs. Are you kidding? What would y'all think? If you pick your house up, turn it upside down and shake it, are the doors going to fall off? Are the doorknobs going to fall off? Those would be considered fixtures, right? So imagine you move into your brand new house and there's no doorknobs. Are you kidding me? This might be a case that if we can't decide, then we may need to advise them to talk to their attorney. Guys, I can't make anybody do anything. I wish I could, but I cannot make anybody do anything. And if we're going to get into haggling over something like doorknobs, for example, then it might be that the judge has to decide for them. What I need you guys to understand, your buyer moves into their home and they don't have doorknobs. Who's the first person they're going to call? Well, they're calling you, aren't they? We try to make sure before the property is conveyed, any personal property items that are supposed to stay, any fixtures that are personal property that is meant to go, fixtures that are meant to stay, we're going to try to make sure before that deed changes hands that what is in the contract is true. We'll do something called a final walkthrough. And as a broker, if you go through the final walkthrough and you happen to notice there are no doorknobs, your flags need to go up. Your red flags need to go up because this needs to be addressed, because this is something that we don't want anybody winding up in jail. So, or not in jail, but in court. Excuse me, not jail, but court. So remember, anything's negotiable. When you're taking your tests, when you're looking at personal property and fixture questions on your tests, What you need to know is in the question, is in the test question. So again, your personal experience, maybe you bought a home and it didn't have the refrigerator, maybe it did. That doesn't matter. The question would need to spell out if that's relevant to the answer. So as we're getting at, the question on the table for personal property versus real property is, does it stay or does it go? The contract may spell out what fixtures remain. We have places to put in the contract when personal property is going to stay or fixtures are going to go. And if we look at this picture, the tree on the left, that's considered real property, right? Can you pick it up and move it? So when you convey, when you buy this house, that tree is going to remain. Well, you cut the tree down and now you have lumber, you have pieces of wood. Can you pick each piece of wood up and move it? That real property became personal property. And now you take that wood and you use it to build a fence. Guess what? We are back to real property. So if the contract doesn't spell it out, then we've got to get the parties to agree. We got to get the parties to get on the same page. And again, that burning question is, what does the contract say? And bottom line, if two parties can't agree to agree, because I can't make them do anything, then the judge can often decide for them. I know that's funny to think about, but y'all, fixtures and personal properties have put buyers and sellers in court before. So this is a very real thing, which is why it's important that you and I know what we do, what we need to put in the contract. So what I have here, this is a fixture list. And this is a fixture list from our standard offer to purchase and contract, the one that North Carolina brokers use the most often. Now we're going to look at the whole contract when we get to Unit 8, but this is just a little snippet. And if I were in this property and my buyer said, does this stay or does this go? Probably one of the first places I would refer to is the fixture list in the contract that I know that we're going to use. Take a second and just read over it real quick. We're not studying it, we're not memorizing it, but we're just getting an idea of what our standard contract, the one that we use the most often, considers a fixture. Fixture meaning it's going to stay. Now understand, the seller is welcome to take anything on this list when they move. We just have to make sure that it is excluded. Does that make sense? We just have to make sure that we exclude this fixture from the contract. We talk about people winding up in court. I'll share this with you. I have heard on numerous occasions over my career that anything that we see in this fixture list is the result of some lawsuit. And for example, about 2 years ago, we got an addition to the fixture list. And that addition, well, that didn't do what I wanted it to do. That addition is exercise equipment, devices that are attached. Y'all remember that when the pandemic hit and everybody ran out and bought exercise equipment, they got tonal mirrors because we couldn't go to the gym anymore, right? So they were buying stuff for their home gym. They attached their tonal mirrors to the wall. And then they went to sell the house and the seller thought they were going to take their tonal mirror with them. But once you attach it permanently in a way that it's meant to stay, it's often considered a fixture. And this came up so many times that the forms committee decided to add that as a fixture. With that being said, could the seller take their tonal mirror when they sell their house? Sure, as long as it's excluded in the contract. That's right, as long as it's written out in the contract. So this idea of what stays and what goes, the contract is a really good place to start. These are fixtures from our standard contract. There are many other contracts out there that may have different fixtures. This is just the one that we tend to use the most often. Somebody's asking about bathroom wall mirrors. I mean, those things are pretty much just attached by a nail, right? You got a nail in the bathroom. We're talking about medicine cabinets. but we're talking about just the bathroom wall mirror. I don't know, could that be considered personal property? I bet so. Which is why, after enough arguments, some buyer moved in and they didn't have the bathroom wall mirror. After enough arguments, they added it to our fixture list on our standard contract. So now there's no confusion whatsoever. Again, could the seller take their bathroom wall mirror? Sure. We just need to make sure that it is excluded. When in doubt, write it out and ask yourself, what does the contract say? Now let's say you're going to list this property and you and the seller are walking through the home looking at various things, which we're going to talk about. And you hand this list to your seller and you say, these things are considered fixtures. I need you to look at it and I need you to tell me if you're going to take anything on this list. And the seller says, well, yeah, that tonal mirror wasn't cheap. I want to take that with me. Awesome. We need to address now how and when the seller's going to take it. And we pretty much got one of two options. The seller can take it down and repair the wall wherever that was screwed in, take it down, repair the wall, paint over the wall before I list the property, before a buyer ever sees it. If they never knew it was there, then they don't want it, right? So in a perfect world, we can get the seller to take it down, like I said, repair the wall, repair the nail holes, whatever. Before I come in to take pictures, before I list the property, the buyer never knows it's there. It's not an issue. You may also have a seller that says, no, I'm going to exercise until moving day, and I'm going to leave my tonal mirror up. I'm not going to be inconvenienced. Awesome. They are the boss. If the seller refuses to remove a fixture before a buyer sees it, listing agents, it now becomes your responsibility to make sure that every buyer that sees this property knows that when they buy this home, that tonal mirror won't be there. We have to promote, we have to advertise in any way that that would be a fixture exclusion. And when the offer comes in, listing agents, you have a responsibility to make sure that it is in fact excluded, that it is in fact an exclusion in the contract. So whether we deal with it before I list or after I list, we still have to deal with any of these fixture items that the seller intends to take. So this just goes to show, again, this just kind of goes to show that being familiar with the contracts, knowing what's in the contracts is a good way. So when buyers start pointing at stuff, do I get this? Do I get that? We start with a list of an idea of things that are going to stay unless negotiated otherwise. If the parties can't agree, if it's a fixture or a personal property, does it stay or does it go? And we have to take it to the judge. The judge is the one that's going to perform the total circumstance test. This is the legal test to determine whether or not it should be considered personal property or fixture, whether or not it should stay or go. And the judge is going to ask themselves a series of questions. The judge is going to ask the intention of the owner or the person that installed it. If it was an owner that installed it, they probably meant for it to be pretty permanent. But if it was a tenant, for example, they may not have meant for it to be permanent. So the judge is going to first consider the intention. They're going to consider the relationship, as we just said, who attached it. Was it the owner or the tenant? What was the method of attachment? Does it cause damage when you remove it? The old saying for fixtures, is it nailed, screwed, or glued? Bolted or welted? Like, how is it attached? How is it attached to the property? And then any adaptation to the property. So any customizations, maybe some custom blinds, for example. You can remember total circumstance test, the questions that the judge may ask, by remembering IRMA, I-R-M-A, and that may help you remember how the judge. But bottom line, the judge is going to determine if the parties can't agree to agree, then the judge will apply the total circumstance test to determine if it should stay or if it should go. And probably one of the first things that when it goes to the judge, probably one of the first things they're going to want to see is that written agreement, because that written agreement beats all. And like we said, if you don't have this written down yet, go ahead and write it down. The burning question is, what does the contract say? And if the contract is silent, now we have a disagreement, could have a disagreement between the parties. So let's talk about that refrigerator again. The website that's advertising the property for sale says that the refrigerator stays. Conveys means it's going to stay. It's going to convey with the property. Let's say the buyer's agent calls the listing agent and says, my buyer really wants that refrigerator. And the listing agent says, oh yeah, the seller's going to leave it. No problem. This is not an issue. But guess what? That refrigerator never made it to the contract. So you can shake your head, yes or no. If the contract is silent on the refrigerator, personal property, is the seller obligated to leave it? No, because what does the contract say? So again, spelling that out, making sure that any of these negotiable items are in the contract. Let's see, we just said that listing agents would be responsible for making sure that fixtures are excluded. Buyer's agents, you're going to be responsible for making sure personal property is included. Because if your buyer thinks that getting that fridge and you forget to put the fridge in the contract, do you have a happy buyer? They come home after they bought the house and there's no fridge, and who's the first person they're going to call? Yeah, they're going to call you first. What can they do? Well, they could take you to court. They could file disciplinary action with the real estate commission. You might be buying a new fridge. I don't know about y'all, but I'd rather buy a new fridge than face the judge or face the disciplinary action. However, if I make sure it's in the contract, then I don't have to buy that fridge. I don't have to face that. Again, our sales contracts are coming in Unit 8. A lot more on that. We're actually going to look at our contract. So the fixture, again, you have, the antique chandelier. I mean, let's face it, you buy this house and you say, my goodness, I don't like that chandelier. Okay. Could you not remove the chandelier, go to Lowe's and buy a new chandelier and come in and replace it, right? You can remove fixtures, you can add personal property. When this chandelier, your new chandelier is in the box, it's still considered personal property. But once you attach it, once you fix it in such a way that it's considered permanent, now you have your fixture. So should I stay or should I go? Well, if it's in the box, we're still looking at personal property. But once it's attached or affixed in such a way that it's meant to be permanent, now it becomes the fixture. Again, we could always remove those lighting, change them out. So the contract helps us in determining some things, but other things we should be able to look at. And when in doubt, put it in the contract so you know your buyer's getting what they think they're getting and your sellers can take what they think they want to take. So what we're saying is personal property can become a fixture. Fixture can become personal property. What we're talking about on contract day is, what does it look like right now? Do we need to exclude it or include it? And that's the difference in real versus personal. Can you pick it up and take it with you? Or if you remove it, does it cause damage? If you remove it and it causes damage to the property, now we're looking at a fixture. Nailed, screwed, or glued, bolted or welted. It's attached in a way that it's meant to be permanent. We talked about the tree in the ground versus the potted plant. The tree in the ground. There are many sellers that have sentimental value to a tree. Maybe they planted a dogwood when little Johnny was born, and they watched little Johnny and the tree grow up together. And now they're moving and they can't fathom leaving their dogwood. Could they take it with them? Sure. They just got to either dig it up before I list, or we have to make sure that we exclude it. When in doubt, write it out. So any kind of installed light fixtures would be considered a fixture. It's going to transfer with the property unless excluded. Again, what does the contract say? And I really do think that the best bet is for the seller to pack it up before I list it. But again, I can't make anybody do anything. So, okay, this is one of like the best fixtures that I've ever seen. So you're getting ready to list a property and the seller says, I really, really want to take my Scooby-Doo ceiling fan with me. Y'all look at that thing. Isn't that cool? Like, where do you get one of these? You know, so they have their Scooby-Doo ceiling fan that they are very attached to. And the seller says, can I take it with me? Absolutely. My recommendation would be to take it down before I list it and replace it with something else, maybe a different ceiling fan, or at least repair the ceiling so you don't leave a big hole in the wall. You guys with me? If it's that important to the seller, the listing agents, we need to make sure that at the end of the transaction, they can take their Scooby-Doo ceiling fan without any issues. If they refuse to take it down, then every buyer that sees this property needs to know that when they buy, that Scooby-Doo ceiling fan will not be included. I would put it in my advertisement. When the agent called and scheduled a showing appointment, I would say, by the by, that Scooby-Doo ceiling fan in the kids' room is not going to stay. I may even put a little tag on it that talks about does not convey. That's my responsibility as a listing agent to make sure all buyers know that when they buy, this isn't going to be there, and I'm going to make sure it is excluded in the contract. So what is a fixture and what is personal property? Again, it kind of comes down to, can you pick it up and carry it away? Or is it attached? Is it permanent in a way that it's meant to stay, that it's meant to remain? Questions on fixtures or personal property?
I had a question.
Yes.
What are like for homes that like I guess like have like generation value to it and whatnot, like grandma passing it, like that. But like, what if you don't know, like the property might have something like, uh, if it was, I don't know, Johnny the dog was buried in the backyard, and like stuff like that. Like, is have that does that happen, or is that
I'm,
just
I'm,
me?
I'm sure it hadn't happened to me. I hadn't heard about anything like that. It hadn't happened to me. But, Ebony, the thing is I can only discuss what I know. So if I
Okay.
don't know about things like that, then, we're going to talk about things called material facts. And when I disclose and when I don't disclose, what I do and do not have to disclose. If I can give you guys a little foreshadowing here, disclose, disclose, disclose. That's the answer to that question. When do I disclose? Always. So once I know something, bottom line, I pretty much have a duty to disclose. Now, if they have a lot of questions about what do we do about this, that's where I may need to refer them to an attorney or somebody else, because this got out of my realm in some cases. You know what I'm saying? So like every once in a while, you may find a home like you were getting at, a home with the family cemetery in the back. What do we do about this? Whoa, that got out of my realm fast. So that's that idea of understanding my lane. And as we're going to learn, as we're going to get going, we're going to learn that, I'm going to ask the sellers a series of questions, and I'm going to try to find as much information as I can. But does that mean I know everything? Probably not. So as long as I've done my duty and asked my questions and tried to discover, that's the best I can do. And who can remind me what we document?
Everything.
Everything.
Everything. So am I going to document these conversations with my sellers? Pretty much our entire listing agreement is one big checklist of things that I'm asking the sellers, things that I'm trying to get that information. Evelyn.
Yeah, just to make sure I have the correct. You say to convert personal property to real property, we call picture, right?
You do
And
what? I'm sorry.
can you hear me?
I didn't hear that last part. You said to
I
convert.
say personal property to real property is picture.
Yes.
And then we have, we can convert real property to personal property. I
Yep.
had the name Severance, is correct?
Severance or annexation yet. We're not going to get bogged down, but yes, you are right. So I can sever it, which means I can remove it from the property, or annexation would be to attach it. But bottom line, what does it look like today? Is it a personal property? Is it a fixture?
Got it.
When in doubt, write it out. You know, some things it's not as easy to look at and see that it's attached. So if there's any question, again, back to those solar panels somebody asked about. If your buyer says something like, I'm not buying this house without solar panels, then my little red flag went up, and I'm going to go ahead and put that in the contract, because that's what protects my buyer. And as their agent, that's all it's about, is making sure they're protected and they're going to get those solar panels. So we have places in the contract to kind of put that verbiage in to make sure we're protecting the party and they're interested fixture or personal property. Probably one of our first really big real estate words. Everybody ready? One of our first big words, and that word is appurtenance. If something is appurtenant, it means that it runs with the land. It's a right or a privilege that goes with the ownership unless it's negotiated otherwise. So things that run with the land. We're going to talk about several appurtenances, things that will, and what I mean by this is things that convey from one owner to the next, to the next, to the next. It's not about the people, it's about the property, it's about the land. So before we get into things that are and are not appurtenant, a little tip for your test. The Real Estate Commission says to consider all improvements appurtenant. So the house, the building, the shed, the fence, all those improvements, the sidewalks, the driveways, right? All those things that we attach to the land, those are considered appurtenant, which means when somebody buys your home, they're getting these things as well. So they run with the land unless negotiated otherwise. Again, we're going to talk a little bit more about appurtenances and specifics in just a few. Another type of fixture that we may come across, is anybody going into commercial or property management? A couple of you? Cool. Another thing you may come across, deal with, are trade fixtures. Trade fixtures, when we're dealing with the commercial tenant, trade fixtures are those fixtures that the commercial tenant attaches to the property in order to conduct their trade, in order to conduct their business. So it might be that you have a tenant that wants to rent out the space to operate a restaurant. Well, the restaurant needs some things attached. They need the stands and the racks and the ovens and the hood and the booths, right? The things that need to attach. Those trade fixtures are considered personal property of the tenant. So the tenant can come in, install these fixtures to conduct their trade, and at the end of the tenancy, the tenant can take their fixtures with them. Trade fixtures are considered personal property of the tenant. If the tenant doesn't remove them at the end of the lease, then they become real property of the landlord. So if that restaurant tenant skips out in the middle of the night, then the landlord has just acquired some real property items. They can sell them, they can do whatever. So trade fixtures are considered personal property of the tenant. We may also have an agricultural tenant, a tenant farmer. Anything that the tenant farmer attaches to the property is considered real property, which means they install the fixtures to do their agricultural, and at the end of the tenancy, they need to remain unless negotiated otherwise. These tenancies, you guys, by the way, are usually a lot longer than the 1-year residential lease that we might be more accustomed to. I'm not building a barn on a 1-year lease. I don't know about y'all. So if I'm building a barn, I want like 10 years, 15, right? So usually commercial tenancies are a lot longer than residential. When we talk about trade fixtures, agricultural fixtures, I mean, the lease might start with 3 years, 5 years, etc. Addressing personal property, we have the UCC, or the Uniform Commercial Code. These are things, personal property is also known as chattel. You might have seen that word. UCC addresses personal property that's leased, but not yet owned. So maybe you have the air conditioning or the water heater on a lease to own. You can't convey what's not yours. So if you don't own any of these personal property items, then you can't convey them. Now, we might be able to work out an arrangement where the seller pays for it in full so they can make sure that it is theirs before they convey. But bottom line, you cannot convey, you cannot give away what you don't own. You cannot give away what's not yours. And these personal property, leased, not owned items are protected under the UCC. UCC requires the creditor to file a notice at the Register of Deeds. Filing a notice at the Register of Deeds is putting on public record that you owe somebody money for this unit, for this AC unit or water heater or dishwasher or whatever that item is. As we get going further and further in this class, we're going to go through the contract to closing process from the day we go under contract to the day we close. And a big part of the process is the closing attorney's job and responsibility. And one thing that the closing attorney will always do is a thorough search of the public records, things that are filed at the Register of Deeds. So if something comes up with the UCC, the closing attorney knows that it needs to be addressed. We're going to talk about liens. We're going to talk about other things that the closing attorney may find. And I'm not saying the seller can't sell. It's just things that have to be addressed before we sell, before they can convey. So anything leased but not owned, UCC says, hey, just put it on, file it with the Register of Deeds. That protects the creditor's interest, and they don't have to worry about that being sold, the property being sold from out from underneath them. Another, is it personal property? Is it real property? Is when we're talking about plants. Now, there's a couple different types of plants for our purposes. There's a couple different types of plants. And we have Fructose industrials, or emblements. These are our annual crops. These are plants or fruits of the industry. So these are things that we have to plant every year. Think corn, soil, or soy, wheat, right? Things that we have to plant every year. We harvest at the end of the season. Whether or not fruits of the industry, annual crops, stay or goes, depends. If the property is for sale, they are considered real property, which means if you sell this farm and there's corn on it, you sell the corn conveys. But if it's a lease property, if it's a tenant farmer, then it's considered personal property, and the tenant has the right to come back this year and harvest their crop. So if the lease runs out before they got this year's crop, it's considered personal property. Now they can't come back next year and the year after that. It's just the year that they planted it And for the tenant, it's going to be considered personal property, so they can go back and get their crop. Yeah, D.
So you mean to say, like, if I was to plant corn and and I move out or I sell the property and it grows, but we didn't reach the end of the year, is it like a calendar year?
This harvest season.
The harvest season.
So you plant it in the spring and then your lease runs out in the summer, you come back in the fall and get your, if you're a farmer, if you're a tenant farmer. So again, please repeat. For sale, crops are considered real property. For lease, they are considered personal property. Just this year. Now, D, you can't come back next year. That's somebody else's corn now, right? You can just come back and get your harvest. Yeah, Dan.
So if, just to clarify, let's just say I bought the property, they did that, and in 3 months they can come pick up their harvest. But I bought the property not to keep it, but because I want to build on it, because I want to divide it into different zones and sell it off. Does that mean that I have to wait for 3 months until they come get their stuff before I can do anything?
Unless the contract says otherwise or a judge tells us otherwise. So see, and again, you guys, remember, this is a long-term lease. It's not like you're here for 6 months or something, right? I mean, commercial, agricultural tenant leases are usually for a lot longer. So honestly, you guys, if I was coming in as a tenant farmer, I would negotiate my lease after harvest season. You know what I'm saying? So then that way I know and I don't have to worry about this. However, if my lease runs out, unless we agree otherwise. Now, Dan, to your point, at the onset of the lease, could the landlord say, when you're done, you're done? Could the parties agree otherwise? Because the landlord's going to say, at this time, I want to subdivide it and sell it. So could they agree otherwise? But don't read into that. Make sure you see that the parties agreed otherwise. Does that make sense? Are you guys hearing what I'm saying about the what if and the what about? It is so easy to run down that rabbit trail, but all you're doing is deviating from the question. So make sure before you start negotiating otherwise, I need you to see it in the contract. If you don't see it, crops are considered real property if for sale, personal property if for lease. The other type of plants, and oh yeah, Dan, was that you again? Or
Yeah, I'm sorry, I have another question then. So, like, like in the United States, you have a prenup, and if you didn't have the prenup, the government provides you one. Same thing with the contracts. My question is, what if you did not disclose that in a contract officially between, the sale and the buyer? Is there a contract that goes as a stock contract that things fall off to, or it goes to the judge regardless?
Yeah, I mean, this is like generally speaking, how we do things here, how we do things in North Carolina, unless it says different, unless we're told otherwise. But just kind of that general understanding of where to start. Again, the parties could agree to do whatever. The contract may not spell it out, but again, if I were a tenant farmer, I'd want this spelled out. I would want it to say, and I'd probably have an attorney helping me anyway, or somebody, a broker, somebody, and the broker is going to say, wow, I think you should talk to an attorney, because we want to make sure all parties are interested. And if they come to you of something specific like that, then what that tells me as their broker is that I got to take those couple extra steps to make sure that they get their crops, or the landlord, you know what I'm saying, whatever they want. Another one of my super simple philosophies, man, I'm giving up all my super simple philosophies tonight. But another one of my super simple philosophies, if it's important to my buyer, then it's important to me. If it's important to my tenant, then it's important to me. If it's important to my seller, then guess what? It is important to me. Once a party shares something of specific importance, then it becomes important to me to make sure that their end use. And I only have the power that is spelled out in our pre-printed forms and the contracts that we use. And if it's not there, that's an example of when we may need to get attorneys involved to make sure that my client's end use can be met. The other type of plants that we come into then are fructose naturals, fruits of the soil. These are things that are planted. So things that we don't, plant once and they're done. So our trees, our bushes, things like that, the dogwood when little Johnny was born, things like that. Those are going to be considered fixtures unless excluded. I get asked a lot if any of my clients have ever had to go to a judge. And my answer to that is not that I know of. I'm pretty sure if they did, I would have known about that, but not that I know of. But with that being said, I do know agents whose clients over various things. I mean, sometimes, it's big, sometimes it's petty, but remember what we said the first day, you can sue anybody for anything. So the best thing I know to tell you guys to protect yourselves, document, document, document. So again, fixtures, personal property, the questions come down to, should I stay or should I go? The tree is considered a fixture. The apples that fall from the tree, we put them in our basket and away we go with personal property. When in doubt, write it out. And anything, as long as it's not breaking the law, anything is negotiable. So with that being said, again, things to start to consider. Every single transaction is different. You are never going to do two transactions that are exactly the same. Think about this. Every home, every seller, and every buyer are different. And the unique combination of all three make for a different transaction every single time. Even if this buyer terminates and we get another buyer, we have a different combination than what we did before. You're going to be in your career for 30 some years and you have 400 transactions under your belt. And guess what? Your 401st is going to be different than anything that you've ever done before. So referencing the contract, knowing your resources, knowing where to go to help your clients get this information, being familiar with the contracts. Any other questions on fixtures or personal property? So next little section, we're going to talk more about these things that are and are not pertinent. Specifically, we're going to talk about owners' subsurface rights. We're going to talk about their air rights. We're going to talk about their water rights. If the property borders a body of water. We're going to define the doctrine of prior appropriation. What's that mean and where and when it's used. Your subsurface rights and your air rights are appurtenant. Appurtenant means what?
It runs with the
runs with the land. So when you buy a home, you purchase the subsurface rights, you purchase the air rights. Water rights are not. So we're going to talk about the different rights, what conveys and what doesn't. So first off, water rights. And there's two different types of water rights. First off, we have riparian rights. If you like a play on words, when you see riparian, do a play on words and see the word river. Riparian rights are for our bodies of waters that do not have a tide. Riparian rights are for our rivers, creeks, streams, rivers. And there's two types of bodies of waters with riparian rights. Non-navigable means you can't get a vessel down. You can't get a boat down this body of water. And the water rights that come with riparian rights said, we're going to split this body of water down the middle, 50-50. Owner one owns halfway. Owner two owns halfway. It's almost like a shared driveway. Non-navigable riparian rights. Water rights cannot be severed, which means you cannot, again, you cannot give away what's not yours. You cannot give away the rights to use the water because you never had the rights to use the water. It's somebody else's water. Riparian rights on a body of water that is navigable. Now we can get a vessel down. Typically speaking, the state's going to own the body of water. Maybe it could also be like a public entity or a private entity, excuse me. Somebody owns the water. The owners to these bodies of water then own to the banks. They don't own the water. Somebody else owns the water. It's navigable. Somebody else owns the water and the owner owns to the banks. I can't retain what's not mine. I can't give away what's not mine. Maybe I can use the water, maybe I can't. It's up to, in this example, the state. So the question is, can a property owner build a dock on that body of water? And the answer, which by the way is probably one of the number one answers to many questions in real estate, the answer is, it depends. It's up to the owner of that body of water whether or not they will allow you to put a dock on it. Some of my triad people may be familiar with Ballew's Creek. My Raleigh people, we got Jordan Lake, right? We got bodies of waters that you see docks in all the time. They're allowing you to put your dock in their body of water. You have no rights, none whatsoever. And when you sell, you cannot take those rights with you. You can't take what was never yours to begin with. So when you sell, that dock, those rights, all that stays. Riparian rights, bodies of water, no tide. Yeah, Tyler.
Does the new owner have,
Say it again.
does the new owner get permission to, or does,
You're really choppy, but from best I could understand, you have to have permission. Is that what you? Yeah, yeah. So whomever owns that body of water says yay or nay. And if they say no and you go put a dock in anyway, they could come after you. They could go after you in court. They could go after to protect their water that you're now infringing on. So whomever owns, may that be the state or the private entity, they would have to give you permission. And I'm sorry if I didn't, but you were choppy. I couldn't. Same for a pond. Yes, a pond, a lake, river, things like that. Riparian rights, bodies of water, no tide. Bodies of water that do have a tide are under littoral rights. So now we're down east. We're down on the ocean or maybe even the sound. Littoral rights, bodies of water that do have a tide. And what littoral rights say is that the owner owns to the average high water mark. Wherever high tide is, high tide to low tide is the foreshore. That belongs to the state of North Carolina. And that's what allows us to walk on our beaches. Low tide out is government owned until we get to international waters. But littoral rights, the owner owns to the average high water. So you can walk on the beach because it's owned by the state of North Carolina. So littoral or riparian rights, no tide, littoral, bodies of water with the tide. I got more to say about water. There's a lot to talk about with water. And I got more to say about water, but we got to take a break. So let's take 10. And we come back, we'll talk more about what else we need to know about water, some water terms. The cameras are popping back on. Let me take attendance. Let's see what we got. All right. Riparian, bodies of water without a tide. Littoral, bodies of water with a tide. And I have taken attendance. So for those of you just coming back, please shoot me a message in the chat to let me know you're back so I can make sure I give you credit for this hour. And your camera's on. Let's see, Gonda, will you tell me you're back in the chat, please? I won't remember this later. My little brain. All right. Just a basic understanding of some water terms. Again, we know water, right? It's pretty much going to do whatever it wants to do. So just some basic water terms with your additional terms. So accretion is the gradual increase in land from the deposit of soil by water. So as water flows, thank you. So as water flows, it may get redirected and it may deposit land, and now we have more land. So that new land is referred to as accretion. Nice. Reliction, increase in land when the water permanently or gradually recedes. So if the water's getting redirected, maybe it's drying up, we could increase, we could gain land from reliction. You know, you build a dam, you build a new bridge, it tends to redirect water. So these are some consequences, and specifically for those homeowners that own bodies of water with these. Erosion, gradual loss of land. So water can erode land, take it with it. And then avulsion is a sudden loss of land just due to mudslide, landslide, things of that nature. Again, you guys staying in our lane. You know, I can discuss basic water rights. If homeowners have a lot of questions, what are my rights? What are mine? This may be when my little red flag goes up and tells me that it's time that they may need to talk to an attorney, maybe the HOA or whomever owns the body of water. A lot of times they come to us and in hopes that we can help direct them in the right, point them in the right direction. Another water term is a doctrine of prior appropriation. This is how they handle water rights out west in our western states. We do riparian rights here. You own to the middle for non-navigable, or you own to the bank for navigable. Out west, they use the doctrine of prior appropriation, which basically says the first one to show up and want to use the water wins. So who has those water rights? The first one to get there. And they claim those water rights, and it doesn't matter who owns the property adjacent to the water. The first one to get there wins. Again, out west, western states, they do things funny out west, don't they? You know what they say out west? They say we do things funny out east. So, you know, we're so they don't do riparian rights out west. They have this first in line, the first one to claim the beneficial use is going to be the one that has the rights to the water to determine those water rights. Water rights cannot be severed. You can't keep something that you don't have. So when you sell You're giving up your dock. You're giving up your water rights. You're giving up. They cannot be severed. So now let's talk about lands, or excuse me, things that may be severed. If they're not severed, though, then they're appurtenant. So they're rights that run with the land, convey from one owner to the next, unless they're severed. As a quick reminder, for your exams, improvements are considered appurtenance. So anytime we approve on the land, they may be public or private rights. We're going to talk about zoning in this unit. We're going to talk about restrictive covenants in this unit. Your well water rights, septic or city water rights, sewer rights. We're going to talk a little bit more about your sewer, on-site septic systems, roads, driveways, utilities. These things are all considered improvements. And unless your exam tells you differently, they are going to run with the land. They are appurtenant unless you are told otherwise. So improvements are appurtenant. Specifics on the terminology. Improvements on the land. Things that we do, like a driveway, for example, installing sidewalks, plumbing, electrical, internet, all those things that we need. All those are considered improvements on the land. You can improve the land and then build your structure. But you can't build a house until you have electricity. You can't build a house until you have plumbing, or at least you know where these sources are coming from. So once you improve on the land, you're priming it to build the structure. Raw land has no electricity, no plumbing, no driveway, nothing yet. Air rights. Air rights are pertinent, which means they can be severed. Somebody could buy or take through a court order the right to use the air above your property. So we talk about our cell phone towers, airports. Anybody live near or around an airport? You can't go out there and hold a sign up in your backyard that says, don't fly your plane over my house. I mean, you can, but it's not going to get you anywhere because those air rights have been severed. Now, PTI or RDU did not come knock on all the homeowners' doors and say, can I fly my plane over your house? That's all mandated through the courts. They got those rights through the courts. Where are my triad people? Y'all remember a couple years ago when FedEx came? And it was the big deal because all those residents didn't want all those big old FedEx planes. And their voices were heard, but we saw how far it got them, right? They had those rights. They severed those rights through court mandate. And now they can fly those big old planes over your property. Some buildings may sever the air rights of the people next door. And that stops them from building any higher than 2 stories or 4 stories. So it keeps their air rights. So know that air rights can be severed. Somebody can buy or take through the courts the right to use the air above your property. Another thing that can be, yes, another thing that can be severed are subsurface rights. With subsurface rights, we're talking about the rights to the minerals, the oils, or the gases under the ground. And somebody could purchase the rights to those mineral oils or gases. North Carolina, those of you down east, you might be dealing more and more with fracking. I think coming soon. If somebody has severed the rights for fracking, then they can pull the gases, pull the resources. Let's go up to West Virginia for a second. All those coal mines that we have up in West Virginia. Somebody has the rights to that coal, even though your house may be sitting on top of it. those rights have been severed. And again, the coal miner's not going door to door asking for permission. This is all handled through the courts. We actually have, when we get to agency in Unit 3, we're actually going to look at a form that the seller has to provide to the buyer to disclose if they have severed the mineral oil or gas rights, or if they intend to sever those rights. Can we all agree with the saying that a buyer deserves to know what they're buying? A buyer has the right to know what they're buying. So if the seller has severed their subsurface rights, if they have the rights to the gases or oils or minerals, the buyer has the right to know that. So we'll see a form, what we affectionately call the MOG, that the seller provides to the buyer to disclose about these subsurface rights. What we need to know right now is that they're pertinent, but guess what? They can be severed. As homeowners, we also have subjacent and lateral support rights. This is what prevents your neighbors from digging in a way that your property either you lose your lateral support, which is what we're looking at here. You see this retention wall? They can dig and dig and dig, but your property is not going to slide down. Subjacent rights are underneath. So again, back to our coal mines. When you guys see the word sub, that prefix, that's a sub for under. So our coal mines, I mean, those coal mines are like miles under the ground. And part of that, I mean, there's several reasons, but part of that is to protect the surface rights. So again, homeowners has rights. Neighbors shouldn't be able to do things that affect my property, either laterally or subjacent. So let's stop and think for just a second. You're buying a property. Yay. And a common question is, when I buy this property, what am I going to get? And the answers to those questions are there improvements on the property? Are there appurtenances? Are there things that run with the land? Are there improvements? Are there fixtures? Are we going to exclude any of those fixtures? Are we going to negotiate and get any personal property? If you're buying property that borders water, what rights do you get with that property? Depending on riparian, navigable or non-navigable, or littoral, depending on the body of water. And what kind of impact, if any, will a mineral lease or a deed have on the property? If somebody severs your subsurface rights, for example, that's a deeded interest, which means it's going to be at the public records. So for some reason it's not disclosed, buyers hire the closing attorney. And one of the closing attorney's biggest responsibilities is to learn as much about the property as they can by searching the public records. The attorney's not going to tell you not to buy. The attorney's just letting you know what you are or are not getting. So if there's mineral, deed, or lease, that would be a recorded interest to alert the buyer to the fact that you're buying this property, but you have no access whatsoever to these minerals, gases, or oils. So the story goes, the reason that we have this form that the sellers have to disclose. So the story goes, there was a builder that bought a big tract of land out in Texas. What's Texas known for? It's oil. And when the builder bought that tract of land, they severed the rights to the oil. But guess what? When they subdivided and built and sold the individual homes and lots, they didn't disclose that to the buyers. The buyers didn't know that they didn't have rights to their oil. So one day, guys out back digging strikes oil and says, woo, I'm rich, like Beverly Hillbilly kind of stuff, right? But the builder said, that's not your oil, that's mine. We went to court, and today we all have a form that we get to use for the seller to disclose if they have severed. You have a right to know if you strike oil, do you get to benefit from that oil, or does that oil belong to somebody else? Can you buy the rights back? Possibly. Possibly. It might be that it's like a temporary. So once I've gotten all the oil, then it's going to revert back to you, or it could be through a court order. You could get those rights back. There's some good, I just want to point out, but this is kind of a further for you guys. Throughout your book, for example, on page 18, you can see you have a couple scenarios. So as you're reading the units, as you're looking ahead, I just want to point out the scenarios. It kind of gives you some in practice situations, help you better understand, help you wrap your brain around this information. Questions on a pertinent water, oil, or water, minerals, oils, air?
I have a question. I think I'll wait for that. I think we're gonna come up on it, but I'll wait. I think.
So jot it down, Dee. How about that? Jot it down so you don't forget it. Because I know my little brain, right? So and then if we come to it, if not, then we'll get that addressed. Switching gears just a bit. We're still on the idea of what do I get when I buy? But switching gears just a bit, and let's talk about estates and ownership. Two different topics in this section. So in this section, we're going to talk about some freehold estates. We're going to talk about what a freehold estate is and what are some different types of freehold estates. We're also going to briefly mention what a non-freehold estate is. So the question on our mind right now at the gate is, what the heck is an estate? And for our purposes, an estate answers the question, either you own it or you rent it. An estate tells us an individual's interest in the property. Please write that down. Estate equals interest. And your interest in the property is either that of an ownership interest or a possession interest. You either own it or you rent it. So our freehold estate is the estate of ownership. If your interest is that you own it, that is your freehold estate. If you possess it as a tenant, if you rent it, it's referred to as a non-freehold estate, also known as a leasehold estate. Now we're going to take estates. I don't want you guys, just bear with me for a second. I know this next slide can be overwhelming. So everybody just take a big deep breath with me. Don't write it down. Everybody ready? So when we talk about estates, we can see we got a lot going on here. Freehold estates, I got several different types. Non-freehold or leasehold estates, we got several different types. These non-freehold estates or our lease estates, we're going to talk about those in Unit 13 because these are the rights of the tenants. So Unit 13 is all about your possession interests. And right now we're just going to focus on freehold estates. This chart that you're looking at right now is available for you in the Google Drive. So I have this there for you guys. You can reference it. And we're just going to focus on the different types of freehold estates right now. Remember, freehold is your estate of ownership. And your interest is that you own it. Freehold estates can be divided into two categories. Freehold estates are either inheritable or not. What we mean by this is once the owner passes away, can it go on to their heirs or will it go on to another party? Named party. So our freehold estates are either inheritable or not. Looking first at our inheritable estates, we're going to talk about each of these. I got something called fee simple absolute. We got something called fee defeasible. And then we have our estates por alter v. Again, we're going to break each of these down. This is kind of a zone in on the chart. These are the estates that are inheritable, which means once the owner passes away, they can pass it on to their heirs, and their heirs is heirs, and their heirs is heirs is heirs. This section tends to get a little overwhelming. So let me say this going into it. I see heads bobbing, which tells me you look ahead. Thank you. Let me say this going into it. The majority of the time, I'm going to make a number up. 99.9% of the time in your real estate career, you're going to deal with fee simple absolute. The reason we have this section is that rare occasion you come across one of these other types of freehold estates and you need to know what to do. And as a real estate broker, if you come across something other than fee simple absolute, what you need to do is get your buyers or sellers attorneys involved. This is teaching us our lane. Remember, y'all, we're not in law school. But we need to talk about it because you need to know what to do about it should it come up. Does that make sense? So what you're going to deal with the majority of your career, and by the way, that 99.9% is like all of us collectively. I mean, it's going to be really rare that you deal with something else. So the majority of the time, what we deal with as real estate brokers are our fee simple absolute. And with fee simple absolute, you have no limits. It's all yours. You own it. You have no restrictions other than those of zoning, covenants, governmental controls. We're going to talk about those. But for the most part, you own it. You own it all. You have the right to do with what you want to. There are no restrictions on how long you can use it or what you can or cannot use it for. Fee simple absolute is what you will deal with most of the time. This is our typical transaction. No limits on ownership, which means all these other types of freehold estates have some type of limit. And the limits are either on time or use. Fee simple defeasible puts restrictions on use. We have a couple different types of fee simple defeasible that we will talk about. But these are deeded restrictions, which means when you buy the property, you know the restrictions. You buy subject to the restrictions. And it's so simple. If you don't like the restrictions, don't buy the property. It's so simple. But you know going into this, you're not blindsided. Life estates then, life estates then have a restriction on time. And again, we got a couple different types of life estates that we'll talk about. Life estates are often referred to as partial estates because you don't own them forever. So fee simple defeasible puts restrictions, deeded restrictions on use. Life estates puts deeded restrictions on time. So our first excuse me, fee simple defeasible is fee simple determinable, these words. Fee simple determinable, generally speaking, fee simple determinable says you can only use this land for one reason, one purpose. So let's say, for example, there's a deeded restriction that says you can only use this land for religious purposes. The moment you do something non-religious on it, you've broken the rules and you could lose the property. Again, you knew coming into this, religious purposes only. And if you wanted to do anything else with it, then don't buy that land. It has a deeded restriction. With fee simple determinable, if you break the rules, if you use it for anything non-religious, that title automatically terminates and it goes back to the person that gave it to you, known as the grantor. Introducing you to that word. The grantor is the person that gave you the property. How do they find out you do something non-religious on it? Doesn't matter. The fact is, once they find out you did something non-religious, it automatically terminates. Again, play on words, you guys. Fee simple, if we can see the word determine in here, it's already been decided. You break the rules, you lose the property. It's already been determined. And you might find verbiage in the deed, or you would find verbiage in the deed. This says something like, so long as it is used for religious purposes, or while the property is used for these religious purposes. So fee simple determinal is a very specific use, and it is the only use that you're allowed to use this property for. Yes, ma'am. Hey, Ebony.
Hey, okay, so fee simple determinable, that's for just a specific use, but not necessarily religious for you, like use.
This is just an example. That's right.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, thank you. Yeah, this is just so you could put any kind of deed restriction on it. You could say public elementary school, you could say medical, you know, whatever it is. I think where we see this a lot is maybe inherited land. You know, maybe granddaddy was a very religious man, and to honor him, we want to keep his land religious. You know what I'm saying? You can put any kind of deed restriction on it, but thank you. This is just an example. Yep.
Okay.
So fee simple determinable says you can only use this land for one thing. Then fee simple conditional says you can do anything you want, but this one thing. I don't care what you do, but you cannot use this land for a pig farm. You do whatever else you want to it. But the moment you farm pigs, the moment you use this as a pig farm, I'm not a country girl, but the moment you start farming pigs, then you have broken the rules and you lose the property. Reversion back to the grantor with fee simple conditional is not automatic. The grantor has to go to court to get the property back. It's not been determined. So again, the grantor finds out that you're using this property for a pig farm. How do they find out? Does not matter. They find out you're using this for property, something other than a pig farm, or excuse me, you're using it for a pig farm. They take you to court and they'll get the property back because the judge is going to look at the deed and say, well, it says right here on the condition that you don't use the land as a pig farm. Yeah, is it, I can't see it in that. Yvette?
Yes, I had a question. For that fee simple conditional, it doesn't automatically goes back. You have to go through a judge.
That's right.
Okay.
Yep. So fee simple to feasible, it's automatic, or fee simple to terminal, it's already been determined. Fee simple conditional, and again, you're going to get it because that's what the deed says, but you got to go through that court process. You got to go through that. By the way, if the grantor is no longer with us, then they're heirs. So the grantor or their heirs. That smell. I wouldn't want to live. No, nowhere near. Again, I'm not a country girl, so I don't have to worry about this anyway. Let's see. Miss Lopez, tell me how to say your name, please. You might be able to hit your space bar. It's like you're typing. Okay. So while she's typing, her mic's acting up. So we're going to give her a minute to type. So in the meantime, another question in the chat. Does the grantor have to prove that you violated? That might depend on the mood of the judge that day, right? But if I were this grantor and I saw you using this as a pig farm, I'm snapping pictures. I'm getting, I'm going to take proof with me. Now, what's the judge? I mean, somehow the judge is going to need to see that this is a pig farm. So again, attorneys might recommend that you have, that documentation, or it might just depend on the mood of the judge. But bottom line, the deed is very, very clear. This property is sold on the condition that it's not used as a pig farm. Watch my chat. Looks like she's still typing. So we'll give her a minute to keep typing and then address her question. The other or an other inheritable freehold estate is one of our life estates. And this life estate is called pour autre vie, which is French for the life of another. So you have the owner, the life tenant, who is you. And you are allowed to use this property. You own this property, you use this property, you live in this property for the life of someone else. That life of someone else is the measuring life. It's the yardstick that determines how long you own this property. You're the life tenant. If you pass away, it can be inherited to your heirs, and your heirs as heirs, and your heirs as heirs as heirs. It'll stay in your family for as long as this measuring life is alive. Once the measuring life passes away, the ownership goes back to the grantor or onto a named third party. I think one of the better examples of this that I've seen actually came from our old material. Some of you have it in the Dearborn book. But the example that they gave was a gentleman had a niece with major disabilities, and he wanted to make sure that his niece had a roof over her head. So he issued a life estate pour autre vie to his brother. His brother was the life tenant. He lived there. He paid taxes. He maintained the property. He owned it. But how long he owned it was determined on the niece's life. Once the niece passes away, then the property goes back to the grantor or onto a named third party. So a pour autre vie can be willed, it can be inherited. We can do whatever we want to for as long as that measuring life, in that example, the niece was alive. Okay, so Miss Lopez, let's see how it would work for the transaction to be reversed. That's what that deeded interest means. So again, going into it, the rules, and if you break the rules, you lose the property. Now, does that mean, you know, if you don't move out voluntarily, then they go to the judge sends the sheriff, and the sheriff can remove you because they have the deed in the hand that says you can use it for that long. Would they have to give their funds back? No, because you broke the rules. So going into this, you know, and those are those restrictions on use. Going into these, you know what you can and can't do, and you know the consequences if you break the rules. I really think it's just a matter of if and when you get caught, right? Maybe the grantor knows the neighbor. Maybe they drive by periodically and make sure there's no pigs hanging out. I mean, there's several ways they could find out. But again, it's just meant to the restrictions on use, they're meant to preserve the property. And I think usually mostly where those comes is property with special importance, property with, you know, it has meaning. I had a lady call me once many years ago, and she had inherited land from her grandfather. It was her granddaddy's land, and he never built on it. And it was just, you know, beautiful wooded land. They had walking trails back there. They had, you know, it was private family land and they used it, but there was no build on it. And her fear was that a builder was going to buy it, subdivide it, turn it into a subdivision. And she said, is there anything I can do to keep it? Is there anything I can do to preserve granddaddy's land in our family? And I said, well, we need an attorney to draft up the deed, you know, to deed that, restrict that deed. And she, you know, said, let me think about it. And I never heard back from her. So I guess she decided not to. But is there something I can do to protect granddaddy's land? I can recommend that she talk to an attorney and put a deeded restriction on it that would restrict that use. Now, if the subdivider, if the builder comes and subdivides and start building, they tear down all those trees and everything, there could be legal consequences for that builder. Absolutely. But unfortunately, the land's already been destroyed by that point. So, and that might be another reason why she didn't. But it just may be something that had sentimental value to her. So pour out your V, it's a measuring life. When that measuring life passes away, the property goes back to the grantor or a named third party. Then we have our non-heritable. So we have a marital estate and we have a conventional life estate. These cannot be inherited, which means when the individual passes away, it goes back to the grantor. You cannot pass it to your heirs. So first off, the conventional life estate, you are the life tenant. When your life ends, the estate is over. It goes back to the grantor, or it could go on to a named third party. That third party would have to be named in the deed. Remember, you guys, we got attorneys setting all this stuff up. This is nothing you and I would ever do as a real estate agent. Is anybody an attorney? I need to ask this. Let me clarify. Is anybody an active member of the North Carolina Bar Association? Hang on, let me go to my other screen. No, okay. So we are not attorneys. Thank you. So conventional life estate, the life tenant owns it for their life. When their life is over, the estate is over. The other one then is a marital life estate. And these are situations where somebody owns property before they get married. So you own property and then you meet Mr. or Mrs. Right, get married. So the question is, what kind of interest do they have? And the marital life estate says that the surviving spouse, so spouse number one has passed away, the surviving spouse is entitled to that elective share. That elective share is based on the length of marriage. Now, we're going to talk in just a minute about when married people buy property, but this is somebody owning property and then getting married. That somebody passes away, their spouse is entitled to some of that estate through this marital life estate. So your unmarried person buys property. That unmarried person with property gets married. That spouse passes away. So the widow or widower is entitled to an elective share. That elective share is based on how long they were married before spouse number one passed away. Again, we're going to talk about what happens when married people buy, but these are the rights that those have. So with the life estates, specifically with the life estates, I hope you heard me say that when they're partial estates, and when a life estate is over, it goes back to the grantor or on to a named third party. Those people have names. With life estates, the remainder man is the named third party. So if it says in the deed, at the end of this life estate, it's going to go to the remainder man, and it'll list. If the remainder man is no longer with us, then it may go to their heirs. This is when life estates are over. If it's to go back to the grantor or there is no remainder man, that's referred to as a reversionary interest. And again, play on words. If we see the word reverse, it reverses back to the person that gave it to you. So the reversionary, it's going back to the grantors or their heirs. The remainder man is the named third party. Understand, it's not anybody. It's the person that's specifically named in the deed. So when a life estate is over, the remainder man or the reversionary will now own it, fee simple absolute. Yes, Ebony. My other Ebony.
Oh, hey.
Here y'all.
I was just interested in knowing, like, what if, like, people get married and then one bought land, but then they eventually something happens and they get incarcerated for like 10 years and stuff. How does that work with the, or if say, God forbid they passed away while they was incarcerated, and then so the wife, will she get the, or you know, the,
Sounds like a
how
good
would
question
that
for
work?
attorney, but I believe, yeah, because I mean, you have an interest, you know, even though your your spouse is in jail, you still have an interest, you know, and that person passes away in jail, man, that's rough. That a person own it. But while they own it, they can do whatever they want to with it. Since they own it, then their duties, well, they get to make repairs and make sure it's maintained, you know, change the furnace filter, put a fresh coat of paint on it every once in a while. They get to pay taxes on it. While they are the life tenant, they are the owner. The only restriction they have is on how long they own it. The only thing that they need to keep in mind as the life tenant, they need to keep in mind that somebody else is waiting in line for the property. So they can't have waste, they can't destroy the property, they can't waste the property. Estovers are using the resources from the property. They can use the resources from the property, but they can't destroy it. They can't waste it. Because again, somebody else is waiting in line for it. So again, if we just think about this for a second, these are good questions, right? I mean, I think I asked this the other day, but just humor me. How many of you have bought a home? Did you have this question? When I buy, what do I get? I mean, like, what's in it for me, right? And these are good questions to stop and ask. And this is why they have the agent. So, you know, what things convey? Back to our fixtures and personal property. What things convey? What things don't convey that I could negotiate, that I could try to get? What level of interest conveys with the property? Do you own it? Do you have some kind of restriction on it? Do you have a fee simple to feasible that restricts the use? Do you have a life estate that restricts the time? Or are you a leasehold estate as a tenant? What's your interest, your estate? In North Carolina, when a buyer buys, they buy the property honoring any existing lease. Let me rephrase that. They buy the property honoring any existing valid lease. So in North Carolina, when you buy a property, the question is it subject to a lease? Because if you buy with the lease, which means you acquire the tenant. More on that coming up as we get further and further. So we talked about our defeasible estates. Fee simple determinable. You can only use it for one thing. If you break the rules, it's already been determined. It automatically goes back to the grantor. Fee simple conditional. You can do anything you want to, except this one thing. If you break the rules, the grantor can take you to court to get their property back. Inheritable versus not inheritable. I do like the chart. It just pretty much just summed up what we just talked about. So again, that chart, you can find it. It's on the PowerPoints. We're on YouTube recording right now. You can also, I have just the chart as a separate piece in our Google Drive. So which ones are inheritable and which ones are not inheritable. Not inheritable means our marital and our conventional life estates. And you mean your interest can't be passed down to your heirs. It can't be inherited. Let's see, I got a couple questions, then we're about ready for a break. So let's start with Zai. Is that from before or is that a new one?
I'm sorry, I never put it back down.
Oh, okay, all right, good, thank you. And then Ebony.
Hey, what I had a question about, like, as far as like estates or how people like back to like as personal property. I do a little DoorDash on the side and whatnot. And one house I went to one time, they had like a bunch of lawnmowers and different stuff like in the country part, here in Winston. And I was just like, hey, like if they was to sell that house, they gotta clean all this stuff. It was just nasty, but it was it was just like, will the person, will they have to get rid of all that stuff before selling the home pretty much, or just take it with them? Like, I always
Unless the
wanted to.
contract says otherwise.
Okay,
And
so
Ebony, here's the hard truth. If you don't want all that lawnmowers and stuff and it's not negotiated in the contract,
mhm,
you do the final walkthrough before you go to the attorney's office to sign.
mm,
And when you sit at the attorney's office and sign, what you're signing is that you agree to take this property in its then existing condition.
mm.
So if you sign it, all that junk becomes yours.
Oh wow.
If you don't want the junk,
Okay,
then don't sign. One
okay.
thing we're going to learn, you guys, when this happens to our buyers,
Thank
because
you.
real
Ooh,
life, this happens, right? And when this happens, I got to give my buyers a choice. You either sign or you don't until we get this thing figured out. Never tell your buyer to sign and then we'll figure it out. Because our contract specifically says the buyer agrees to take title to this property in its then existing condition. So if you sign, all that junk becomes yours. That's tough, isn't it? Remember, you guys, I'm a fact finder and I'm never going to look at a buyer and say, oh, just sign and we'll figure it out. No, we need to get this figured out before we sign. All right, guys, last break. Let's take 10. And when we come back, kind of moving on to the next little topic.
Set timer for 9 minutes.
9 minutes. Starting now.
And we're back. I'll say last hour, but really it's like last 50 minutes. Guys, remember, if this last hour is tough for you, get up, move around, stretch, do what you need to do to stay with me. Stay with me till the end. How are we doing? Everybody good so far? Hanging in? Good. All right, so I am going to take attendance. And so we've talked about our different estates. Again, make sure you have that written down. An estate is just your interest. What type of interest? And specifically, we looked at freehold estates, which means what is your interest with a freehold estate? Somebody tell me, what's your interest?
I'm sorry, ask that again.
Freehold estate, what is your interest?
Absolute, total.
That's one form, but what's your interest in it? Do you possess it as a tenant?
No, you own it.
You own it, that's it. So a freehold estate, your interest is that of ownership. The leasehold estate, the non-freehold estate, we will get to in Unit 3. Those are the rights of our tenants. And actually, those are interesting because they combine the estates. The landlord has the freehold estate, the tenant has the leasehold estate. So when we talk about our tenant-landlord relationship, we're going to talk about how those two types of estates work together. Two different things going on, two parties. Next little section, we're going to talk about different types of ownership. So estates tell us your interest. Different types of ownership tell us how you own it. So we're going to talk about owning it in severalty, owning it concurrently with multiple other people. We're going to talk about hybrid estates. And we're going to talk a little bit about timeshares. Several different ways you can own real estate. You can own it in severalty, which means you own it all by yourself. Maybe you're an individual, maybe you're an entity. You could own property with others. Maybe you're an LLC or a corporation or a partnership, and you could own it concurrently with others. You could own property with your BFFs concurrently, and different interests and ownership interests. And then you could own with a spouse. So we're going to talk about owning in severalty first, and then the different forms of concurrent forms of ownership. So first off, severalty, which means you are the sole owner. Little play on words. This one might be a little harder to see, but I think once we see it, we see it. If you own it in severalty, it might be that you have severed everybody else out, and now you're the last man standing. For whatever reason, maybe you bought it by yourself, but maybe you have severed all other interests. Either way, if you own it severalty, it is one owner. Maybe it is an individual, one person owns property. Maybe it is a corporation, LLC, one entity. So severalty, since you're the only owner, then you have 100% ownership, and there is one name on the deed. When you go to sell the property, you don't have to talk to anybody. You do what you want to do. You're the only one. You don't have to answer to anybody. You don't have to get approval from anybody else. Ownership in severalty, you don't need to partition for the sale. Partition for the sale applies to concurrent forms of ownership, 2 or more owners. And if there's an issue, if there's a question in ownership, if one person wants to sell and somebody else doesn't in a partnership, Then a partition of sale is just that court ordered sale. The court could require the property to sell. In severalty, though, that's not necessary. You wouldn't have to go to court because you make the decision. When you decide to sell, you don't have to answer to anybody. You can just sell. We're going to revisit that partition for sale when we look at our concurrent forms of ownership. And then ownership in severalty, once that one passes away, then it's going to go on to their heirs or whomever is left in the will. The devise is the person that receives title via will. So more often than not, the heirs, but quite frankly, you could devise your ownership any way you want to. So severalty, 100% ownership, one name on the deed. Then we have concurrent forms of ownership. Concurrent forms of ownership could be 2 owners, could be 2,000 owners. Concurrent forms of ownership is 2 or more people or entities on the deed. And we have a couple different types of concurrent forms of ownership. So the first type we have is tenants in common. Tenants in common ownership are typically on equal. So somebody may own 20%, somebody may own 30%. And when we talk about your ownership interest being on equal, we're talking about how much of it you own. We're not talking about how much of the property you possess. So you may have a different level of ownership, but it's still one deed, it's one property. Even though like this one person has a 30% ownership, they still have as much right to access the entire property as everybody else. We can't divide the property up. We're not talking about dividing the property. We're talking about dividing the ownership. You can't draw a line down the middle of the property and say, this is my half, this is your half. When you guys were growing up, did anybody ever grow up with siblings that you had to share a room? See, I guess, I don't know if you call me lucky or not, but I'm an only child, so I didn't have to deal with this. But I had cousins, and I remember my cousins would fight. And sometimes when they shared a room and they would like draw a line down the middle of the room, right? And say, this is my half, you can't come into mine, this is yours. Anybody else ever have to get that far with your siblings where you had to divide the bedroom? You can't do that with these different types of concurrent ownership. What we're talking about is the percentage. When these people sell the property, the percentage is telling us how much of the sale they're going to get. It's not telling us the access to the property. So tenants in common is typically an undivided interest for the entire property. Again, we're not divvying up the property. I often think, and this is just an example, but I often think of tenants in common as more of a business arrangement. Maybe you've gone into business with friends or something. You know, I've always heard if you go into business with somebody, never go in 50-50. You need to go like 49-51 so somebody has, and I think this would be a good example of tenancy in common. With tenancy in common, when an owner passes away, their share goes to their heirs. So where you had 4 owners, if one of these guys pass away and they have 2 heirs, now you have 5. You have the 3 original, and then you have the 2 heirs of the one that passes. If the 3 remaining don't like this, then they may partition the sale. They may request the court to sell that piece. But typically speaking, when we come into this, we have this understanding. We know that when one passes away, their share goes to their heirs. Each party has the right to sell their share. Again, if the other owners don't like it, then we can partition the sale. We can go to the courts. The tenant in common can encumber the sale, which means they could burden it. So if there's some legal things going on, they could kind of throw their weight around on the legalities of it. And again, if anybody doesn't like this, partition the sale, suit for petition, we're saying the same thing. And that's just that court order. If this one passes away or this one wants to sell, and you as one of the remaining 3 owners doesn't like what's getting ready to happen with that interest, then you have the right to suit for petition. Try to get that interest back, divvy it up, however it is that the remaining 3 want to handle it. Again, you guys, these are set up very carefully. So we kind of agree going into it. What happens if I want to sell? What happens if I pass away? So tenant in common, typically unequal shares. What do we need to know? Unequal shares, one passes away, the share goes to their heirs. Another form of concurrent forms of ownership that we have is joint tenancy. Again, multiple owners, could be 2, could be 2,000. Joint tenancy is typically equal shares. We own 50-50 or 25-25, 25-25. Couple things about joint tenancy. In order to be a joint tenant, everybody has to have the same level of ownership, so that's our equal shares. Everybody's got to be on the same deed. Everybody has to take title at the same time. So we all show up, we all take title at the same time. We're going to talk in just a minute what happens if a new guy comes in. Well, understand they can't come into the ownership as a joint tenant because they were not there originally when the rest of us took title. So in order to be a joint tenant, we all have to be there at the same time. We all have to be on the same deed, take title at the same time. And again, even though it's the same level of ownership, we're not divvying up the property. We're not drawing a line down the middle. We're all still on the same deed. Now, this is important. There's something called right of survivorship. And I think right of survivorship makes a lot more sense when we talk about the next form of concurrent forms of ownership. And the next one we're going to talk about is set aside for married couples, people that are married when they buy property. So back up for just a second. What right of survivorship says, if you have 2 people that own a property and one of them passes away, their interest automatically goes to the remaining spouse. I don't care what this person's will says. When this person passes away, right of survivorship says this person now owns it in severalty. They are 100% owner. When this person passes away, now the will kicks in. That's for married people. How does this work for joint tenant? Joint tenancy may or may not have right of survivorship. If they do have right of survivorship, when one owner passes away, then the interest, now we got these 4 owners down here. So one passes away, right of survivorship says the interest goes to the remaining 3. Another one passes away, now we're down to 2. Another one, and now you got one that owns it in severalty. Nationally, when you see a test question on your exams, I need you to first stop and ask yourself if you're in the national section or the state section. North Carolina doesn't favor right of survivorship. In North Carolina, right of survivorship for joint tenants has to be created. It's got to be created with purpose and intent by the attorney. But if it's not created, there is no right of survivorship, which means when the interest passes away, it'll be up to their heirs. So right of survivorship is automatic in the national section. I need you to see it in the state section. It is not automatic. In North Carolina, we don't favor it. but it can be created purposely. So hang on to that. More on right of survivorship in just a second. So again, it's an undivided interest, which means you can't draw a line down the middle of the property and say, this is my half or my quarter. Don't come onto it. I won't come onto yours. What we are talking about with ownership, again, if we sell, I'm going to get 25%. You're going to get 25%, 25, 25. So upon death, with right of survivorship, that's what that little asterisk means. With right of survivorship, then the property passes to the remaining joint tenants. Joint tenants can sell, but the new owner can't come in as a joint tenant. Because remember, to be a joint tenant, we all have to take title all at the same time. So one joint tenant passes away and the new guy comes in, the new guy will come in as a tenant in common. Owners can encumber their interest, just not the entire property. Nobody can lay claim to the whole property. And joint tenancy with right of survivorship cannot be overrode by a will. Right of survivorship cannot be overrode by a will. Again, best example of right of survivorship. Married people. This one passes away. I don't care what this person's will says. This person's passes away. Right of survivorship says their remaining interest goes to the other owner. It doesn't matter what that will says. Back to joint tenancy. If anybody has a problem with it being inherited or not, then we can sue for that partition to force the sale. We can go to the judge. The judge may figure out a way to make everybody happy. They may just say require the property to be sold. It just depends on the circumstances and the situations. What do we need to know about joint tenancy? Shares are mostly equal, and right of survivorship is not favored in North Carolina. Right of survivorship is national in North Carolina. It has to be created. It has to be added. So joint tenants with right of survivorship, it's going to pass to the other tenants, to the remaining owners, not their heirs. And that's what right of survivorship means, with right of survivorship. It goes to the tenants. I don't care what wills say. It will not go to your heirs. If you don't have right of survivorship, then it'll go to your heirs or whoever is named in your will. The other thing we said, joint tenants, each owner can sell their share. They can sell their interest. But remember, the new guy, the one that buys their interest, can't come in as a joint tenant. And I think that's important to know about joint tenants as well. I don't think. It's important to know about joint tenants as well. We all take title all at the same time. So let's say you have 3 joint tenants. We're going to call them A, B, and C. They're in as joint tenants together. Their relationship is a joint tenant because they took title at the same time. They're all on the same deed. We all did this together at the same time. And let's say, for example, that B wakes up one day and says, you know what? I'm done with you guys. I'm going to sell my interest to D. We'll call him owner D. Let me change his color so we can see it. Maybe a little bit better. We're going to change this to owner D. As soon as B sells to D, that terminates the joint tenancy between B and A and B and C. D and A are now tenant in common. B and C are now tenant in common. But notice that didn't affect the relationship between A and C, because A and C are still the original. They were there at the same time taking title on the deed. So selling an interest, this gets out of our realm really fast. This is a call it attorney thing for sure. But selling an interest can change what your ownership looks like. It can change what you get, what you don't get. And now the question on the table is, okay, so what if one of these, A, C, or D, pass away? What happens to their interest? And the answer to that is going to be, it depends. A and C are still right of survivorship, with right of survivorship, are still going to have, pass on to each other. But what about the ticks? What about D? This is when we get attorneys, you guys. This is when we need to know that this got out of our realm, this got out of our expertise fast. Again, these ownerships are created by attorneys. I cannot legally advise somebody how to take title. And this is what I don't want you guys to worry about. I can never look at a buyer and say, okay, based on your circumstances, I think you guys should take title as joint tenants. That's not my job. Advising people how to take title is the attorney's job. What I need to know is if I'm helping buyers buy and they're not married, then I need to make sure that I advise them to talk to an attorney for an attorney to explain to them how to take title. I certainly don't want y'all whipping out your pre-licensing books and trying to explain this to your buyers. Everybody with me? This is your lane. And we need to know when to say, wow, this just got complicated. Let's get our attorney involved. Or you want to take title as joint tenants? Let's get our attorney involved. Some people will tell you that joint tenancy was meant to mimic ownership for unmarried couples. Now we're going to talk about married next. But as an example, I had buyers several years ago and they were not married. And I knew they weren't married, but I knew they both wanted to be on the deed. And so I coordinated a call on their lunch break between them and their closing attorney, so the attorney could explain joint tenancy and tenancy in common, and they could decide based on the attorney's explanation how they wanted to take title. Now, I wasn't part of that call, but I'm pretty sure it came down to, if something happens to one of you, what do you want to have happen to your interest? Do you want it to go to the remaining partner, or do you want it to go to your heirs? And that question alone can help us better determine joint tenancy with right of survivorship versus the tenant in common. What if there's still a mortgage? The same thing. The question is, what if there's still a mortgage? Then same thing, if you sell it severalty, it'll have to be paid off. It'll have to be handled before that property can convey. So same thing, if you sell it all by yourself, if you still own money, you have a lien on the property. We're going to get into liens tomorrow night. And if you have a lien on the property, it's got to be paid off before you can convey. So I got tenants in common with unequal shares passed to your heirs. I got joint tenants with equal shares. Right of survivorship says it goes to the remaining owners. Without right of survivorship, it'll go to heirs. And then the last form of concurrent forms of ownership that we have is set aside for those that are married when they take title. Please listen to me. You don't buy property and then get married. In order to be a tenant by the entirety, you have to be married and then buy property. Marriage first and then buy property. Remember, we talked about that marital life estate, and that addresses what happens if you own property before you get married. Tenancy by the entirety talks about what happens when you buy property when you're already married. North Carolina is a spousal state. In North Carolina, it takes 1 to buy and 2 to sell. Both spouses don't have to show up to buy the property. But guess what? If either one of them wants to sell, then we need both spouses to show up to sell. 100% ownership by both spouses. I will never forget. Let's see, I took pre-licensing in 2008, and I will never forget the things that we remember. My pre-licensing instructor gave us the story of North Carolina being a spousal state, 1 to buy, 2 to sell. And the story he shared with us was that a gentleman purchased a condo for his mistress. Could he buy that condo for his mistress without his wife? Sure. That relationship ran its course, and the gentleman thought he was going to sell that condo. And guess what the attorney said?
Where's your wife?
Uh-huh. Your wife has to sign this. Is that a good situation to be in? No. So he pretty much had 2 choices: fess up or find a tenant, right? I mean, he could not sell that condo. He could buy it without her, but he couldn't sell it without her. So I guess the moral of that story is rent the apartment for your mistress. Don't, no, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. But but you guys, you get what we're saying, right? He could buy condos all day long by himself, but he needed his wife before he sold it, because North Carolina is a spousal state. Your spouse may or may not be on the deed, but North Carolina is a spousal state. Now, this is the time that I get a lot of questions about prenups, and the prenups are the what ifs. We're not testing on prenups. We're not focusing on prenups. 1 to buy, 2 to sell. I also need us to understand you're either married or you're not. This is not like the Facebook status, yes, no, it's complicated. You're either married or you're not. If you're separated, you're still married. If you're engaged, you're not married. You're either married or you're not. So if you're separated, you are still married in the eyes of North Carolina until you're legally divorced. Once that couple gets divorced, then usually the divorce decree spells out what's going to happen to the property. Is one person going to get it? Or are they both required to sell it? But once that couple is legally divorced, if they remain owners, then their ownership converts to a tenant in common. But again, usually the divorce decree will spell out what's going to happen. Let's see, I saw a hand, and that's my other Ebony. Hi, other Ebony.
Hi. Okay, so is that like for every single property that a person buys, as long as they're married? It's a really.
Yeah, we're not specific to residential. Now, if you're going to go into business, then you're going to probably set up a business entity, which, you know, so you may have some more control about whether or not your spouse is on or not. So typically speaking, Ebony, this is referring to residential. But if you're going into business, then your spouse is going to have, you know, some kind of rights or something, you know. If you're going into business with other people, then it might be designed in such a way that it's just the owners and not the spouses. So I guess the long answer to your question is it depends. A lot of it comes down to how is it created.
Okay.
Can they get can they get a divorce and their spouse never know they bought the property? Yeah, so you're back to the gentleman. So he bought the condo, right? And then the relationship with the mistress ran its course, and then the relationship with his wife, and now he's divorced. The wife's not on the deed, so now he owns it several till he can sell, but he's got to wait until he's officially divorced. Look at y'all trying to find loopholes. How can I buy a condo for my Mr. or mistress? Guys. Rent. No, I'm just kidding. So with North Carolina, again, what we mean by a spousal state 1 to buy, 2 to sell. Nobody can force the sale. I don't have to convey if I don't want to. My spouse doesn't have to convey if they don't have to. We are 100% ownership, so I cannot convey half of my interest. It's either all or nothing. Things that terminate tenancy by the entirety, we just said divorce. If either party passes away, if either spouse passes away, or if both agree to sell. Once they sell, then that will terminate the tenancy by the entirety. And the tenancy by the entirety, I think that's the easiest for us to understand that right of survivorship. 2 spouses. 1 passes away, the interest automatically goes to the remaining spouse. So with joint tenancy, again, nationally, right of survivorship is automatic. You don't have to see that in the test question. In the national section, joint tenancy has right of survivorship. In the state specific section, I need you to see right of survivorship. If it's not there, it's not there. Right of survivorship with tenancy by the entirety, something happens to one spouse, the other now owns it. The remaining spouse now owns it in severalty, and wills cannot overturn the rights of survivorship. It's a lot to think about before you do something like get married or start a business with somebody, right? I mean, you know, buy property with somebody. There's a lot to think about. Yeah, D.
Sorry, I'm crying baby right now. So, my question was, so if, how can I put it? Because I'm trying to figure out something now. If a couple got purchased a house without being married, but both of their names is on the house, do that go to their ears?
If they are on as tenants in common, then yes. If they're on as joint tenancy without right of survivorship, yes.
Okay.
If they're not married, they either take it by tenants in common or joint tenancy. Joint tenancy, then the question is, do they take right of survivorship or not? Like I said, if we can think joint tenancy kind of mimics tenancy by the entirety for unmarried couples.
Gotcha.
Just in North Carolina, we got to take, or the attorney needs to take that extra step to create that right of survivorship. They'll do it. We just got to, you know, they just need to know to do it, which is why we need the attorney to have the conversation with them.
Now, can they do that after, like, say if one of the spouse passed and then they bring it to what, probate court or?
I mean, so now a spouse passes and somebody owns it in severalty and they can do with it whatever they want to. They could sell. I mean, we lost my mother-in-law a couple years ago. So she passes away. So now my father-in-law owns it in severalty. And to protect him, to protect his interest, we added tenant in common with his 2 sons and my sister-in-law by default, because North Carolina is a spousal state. So they recreated the will. Does that make sense? Not the will. I'm sorry, the deed. You know, once that happened, they redid the deed. Now flip that coin. Before I got married, I bought a condo. I was living the good life in severalty, right? And then, you know, and then I got married. The act of getting married didn't create tenancy by the entirety. However, if something happens to me, then my husband would still have rights because we are now spouses. And that's where that marital life estate would kick in. So if something happens to me, how much is he going to get? It depends on how long we were married, that elective share. Ebony.
Okay, so what if you get married outside of North Carolina?
I don't know. So property in other states, all states have their own different uniqueness, their own different laws. You know, It would just depend on how that state. Now, if I run away to Vegas and get married, I'm married everywhere, right? Right. But if I want to buy property in another state, how would that work? We need to look into those state laws.
Okay.
Each state's just a little bit different.
Okay.
Yep.
I
And
have
by the way, you guys, we're going to get into deeds and stuff like that in future units. Back to my personal scenario. When my husband and I got married, I deeded that interest from me to us and created a Tennessee by the entirety. But did you hear me? I had to create it. I had to have, we did what's called a quit claim deed. We're going to learn that word when we get into future units. But I create, and that way, if something happens to me, he doesn't need, he's good to go. You know what I'm saying? I did that to protect him. I didn't have to, but for my peace of mind, I felt better. So today we are tenants by the entirety because I purposely created that. I deeded it from me to us and created that relationship. We got common law in Alabama. Apparently they can take half of your toothbrush. Yeah, that's great. I love y'all in the chat. Dee, did you have another question?
Yes, I have one more question.
Sure.
So so I was married in a different state and we purchased in North Carolina. Like
You're married everywhere. If you're married in a different
Okay.
state, you're married everywhere. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
I was confused for a second. I'm like, wait a minute.
No, like
Okay.
I said, we run away to Vegas and get married, we're married.
Yeah.
Or Atlantic City or, wherever, we're married, right? It's just a matter of our ownership interest in this state. So the big thing that we're focusing on or that we need to know with these concurrent forms of ownership is what happens when it sells, what happens to that interest, what happens upon divorce for tenants by the entirety, and what happens upon death for each. Also, with the concurrent forms of ownership, you can suit for petition to force the sale, which means if you want to give up your interest, but the other owners have a problem, then we can go let the judge. Remember what we said at the beginning of the class. If two parties can't agree to agree, then the judge can decide for them. And when it comes to ownership, interest in property, absolutely. I have this chart. I'm going to put this in our Google Drive. Let me make a note. I'm going to put this chart. Can't talk and write at the same time. I'm going to put this chart in our Google Drive because I think this is a really good summary of the three. And I think this is going to be helpful for us closer to the middle of February when we're preparing for our exam, because I got a whole lot more to talk about between now and then. So I think when we're reviewing and we're getting ready for our exam, this chart's going to kind of help us see. And what we're looking at here are the similarities and the differences of the different forms of ownership. So let's see what we got. Let's see what you guys have to say. Some scenarios here. I have a married couple purchases property without specifying the type of ownership. How are they going to take title? Anybody? Yep.
Is it tenants by entirety?
Tennessee by the entirety. Because what's the key word here? They are
Married.
married. Tennessee by the entirety is the default. Married couples can do joint tenancy. They can do tenant in common. But if they don't say otherwise, Tennessee by the entirety is the default. So they were married, they don't specify, they're going to be tenants by the entirety. I have a married couple that purchases a property as tenants by the entirety. Years later, they divorce. What happens when the ex-husband passes away?
Since they're divorced, it's not going to go to the ex-wife or the surviving wife.
That's right, because the divorce terminates the tenancy by the entirety. The death of the ex-husband in this case. I think what they're saying is they divorce and then the guy passes away. So either the divorce or the death of a spouse will terminate the tenancy by the entirety. The remaining spouse will own it in severalty. Fee simple absolute. Yep. Yep. So we have property that's owned by 3 individuals with equal shares as tenants in common. One of them passes away. What happens to their interest? Tenants in common. What happens to their interest?
Going to the heirs?
Years.
Yep. Yep. So with tenants in common, when one owner passes, then it goes on to theirs. Isn't that interesting? Think about it. You have tenants in common. 2 people own, I'm going to make numbers up. Somebody owns 60%, somebody owns 40%. The person that owns, or in this case, 50-50, they got equal shares in this case. So 50-50, one of them passes away, and the one that passes away has 2 heirs. So you did have 2 owners. One of them passed away, and now you have 3. What if we don't like this? This is when we file the petition to suit. This is when we go to the judge to try to fix it and make everybody happy. See, I think I got one more here. No, a few more. Married couple owns a property as tenants by the entirety. Couples will state that their 3 children will inherit the property. The husband dies. Who gets the property?
The wife.
The
The
wife.
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 Because they are tenants by the entirety, because they have
Right of
right of
survivorship.
survivorship. So it doesn't matter who died. It doesn't matter what the husband's will says, because of the rights of survivorship, because of the tenants by the entirety. The kids will get it when the wife passes, right? Assuming that's what her will says. That's when we look at the wills with the remaining spouse. A couple purchases a property, taking ownership as tenants in common. 2 months later, they get married. How do they own the property?
Tenants in common.
Tenants
Yeah.
bond.
Heard it.
Tenants in common.
Tenants in common.
Tenants in
Because
common.
the act of getting married doesn't create tenancy by the entirety. Make sure we hear that. You own on your own, or you're a couple, you buy it not married. You walk down the aisle and say your I do's. It didn't change your ownership interest. So they are still going to own it as tenants in common. They could choose to create, but again, that's one of those what ifs. You would need to see that. Otherwise, they're going to own it as tenants in common after they're married. 4 people own a property under joint tenancy. One owner dies and the will states that the interest will pass to the surviving spouse. Let's assume they have right of survivorship. Who owns the property?
Three people and the spouse.
Let's see, 4 people, one owner dies, assuming they have right of survivorship. Joint tenancy is going to override the will. So you have 4 joint tenant, one passes away, who owns it? Now we're down to 3 owners. Another one passes away, now we're down to 2. The other one passes away, and we got the last man standing that owns it in severalty. And that's what we were talking about, that play on words with severalty. That last man standing has severed all the other owners from the interest. They started with 4, and as they started passing off, they were the last man standing. Joint tenancy will override a will with right of survivorship. Again, you guys, never ever in your real estate career are you going to look at buyers and say, all right, this is what up. This is how you're going to take title. So not our job. You got to get out of your lane. You got on like the wrong highway. I mean, you're not even, so a big part of this class is teaching you guys what I can and can't do. And we need to be prepared for these things to come up, and we need to be able to say, unmarried people, 4 people buying, great. Let's get our closing attorney involved that can explain how you take title. Telling people to take title is the job of the attorney. Did everybody hear me? Head bobs from all. You know when agents get themselves in trouble? Because they act like attorneys or appraisers or general contractors or roofers or electricians. Stay in your lane. Yes, this is the class that teaches you how not to get sued. This is the class that teaches you how to avoid disciplinary action. I mean, seriously, I feel like I have two purposes. I told you all on day one that, my job is to get you through the state exam, to prepare you for the state exam. But quite frankly, I feel like I'm dual purpose, and my other purpose is to help you keep your license once you get it. We're going to talk about that disciplinary action. Might put a little bit of fear in you.
I have a
coming up in the
question.
next unit. Yes, ma'am.
Sorry,
Ariana.
I'm sorry, I didn't raise my hand. So back to number 2 here, 4 people on a property under joint tenancy, one
Mhm.
owner dies, and the will states the interest will pass to the surviving spouse.
With right of
So
survivorship. Yeah, we need
yeah.
to put that in with right of survivorship.
Oh, okay. Well, my question is, the lawyer who wrote up that will, should he not have been informed how that property was owned?
Maybe he was, maybe he wasn't. Maybe this was a separate thing where my spouse and I did a will, but the
Okay.
other 3 people that I did joint tenants with, or something, and that's why we have things like this. This is why we have understandings like this. This is why the attorney, let me rephrase all that. This is why the attorney has understanding like things like this.
Julie said, stay in your lane.
Sorry?
I said, you said, stay in your lane.
Stay in your lane. Stay in your lane. And that's what I'm doing, you guys. I'm teaching you your lane. And guess what? When we get into the next unit, I'm going to teach you your speed limit. Because it's one thing to keep you in the lane, but now I got to keep you under the speed limit. Can you speed? Can you get on the highway and go faster than the posted limit? Oh, it's so easy. I got a new car last year. It's got something in it called a turbo. And I don't really know what that means, except it's really easy to go really, really fast. It's awesome. It's a good time. I don't know how I haven't got a ticket yet. It's a good time. Does that make it okay? But officer, I have a turbo and I can go. Does that make it okay? You can, but that's what we're keeping you out of real estate jail. That's what we call it. I want to keep you guys out of real estate jail. All right. So who must approve the sale when we're selling the property? Any tenants in common, joint tenancy, tenancy by the entirety. Who has to sign to convey it? Can only one sign to convey the whole property? No, we need everybody. Everybody took the title. We need everybody to sign it. Does the potential client have the right to sell the property? So you've been called to list a property. Do you think you want to know who has the right to sell it? And their spouses. So this is a good question, and this is kind of where we're heading in our future units. I'm going to pull the deed, and I'm going to see who's on the deed. And then I'm going to ask questions like, hey, are you married? Do you have a spouse that's not on the deed, for example? I just mentioned my father-in-law's deed, and his 2 sons are named on the deed. I'm not on the deed, but next to my husband's name, it says married. What's that tell anybody that touches that deed? That somebody else, my name's not on there, but it is. Does that make sense? So knowing when you go to list that property, who can sell it, and making sure everybody's on board. Because if anybody doesn't show up to sign, then they can't convey. So we need to make sure that all the parties that have to sign that deed are on board from day one. Yes, ma'am, D.
So if you look on I guess like the property taxes, and it says who's on, who property it is, like it said like Demetria, or then it say like in care of Asia. What does that in care of?
I don't know. That's the tax department. What we're talking about is the
that's
deed,
something
the
different.
ownership,
Okay.
So 2 different things going on. The tax department pulls their information from you know, somewhere. What we're talking about is the deed is our proof of ownership. So who actually owns it? So if one co-owner refuses to sell, then I can't convey. Listing agents, I think I would rather find out that everybody's on board from day one, on the same page from day one, than get to the closing table and say, what do you mean your spouse isn't coming today? Now your seller's in breach because they can't convey, and there's legal consequences for breach of contract that we will talk about. So again, we need to make sure everybody's on board on day one. What terminates tenancy by the entirety? Sale, divorce, or death. The parties can agree to sell, one party could pass away, or the parties divorce, and again, the default is to tenants by the tenants in common. So if we divorce and we're still on the title, we're going to default to tenants in common. It's a lot of stuff, you guys. It's a lot of stuff. How are we doing? Did that help? I know some of you came in and said Unit 2 is weird. I couldn't agree more with you. Did tonight's help it make a little bit less weird? It's still weird, but is it a little bit less weird? Again, having a better understanding of what we're responsible for. And I think that's helpful as well.
Yeah, I was really confused when I got to the I think it was the freeholds and the states. I was like, I'm reading Spanish here because I still don't, I'm reading it, but I still don't, it's not clicking. I was like, I guess, reading ahead. And then now while you're talking about it, it's like, got it.
Good. Thank you, Dee. And now you guys can go back and review the Unit 2 stuff and Learn Test Pass, and that's going to help solidify all this. That's going to help. These test questions are going to help you really sort through it. So it's a lot, you guys. And remember, we keep moving forward. So tomorrow we're still in Unit 2. We'll be in Unit 2 all night tomorrow. We may get to math tomorrow. So just if not tomorrow, then Thursday. So be prepared for that. If you guys have any questions tomorrow, don't hesitate to reach out to me. Listen, I'm going to stop recording right now and I'm going to go away. So if you guys want to stay on the call and exchange information to form study groups, I'm going to leave the call open for you to do that. Okay. So I'm going to stop recording and you guys can, and otherwise, if you don't, then I'll see you guys tomorrow.
Thanks, Julie.
Thank you.
Thank
Good night.
you.